Did you notice how your reflection greets you like a stranger every morning? It seems familiar, but often it's a visage shaped by every gaze that ever landed on your face. You step closer to the mirror. The cold glass feels like a second skin. Under the fluorescent bathroom light, you see not just yourself, but the weight of every whispered comment, every unspoken judgment. The mirror has become a ledger of others' expectations. Our self-image is born in the mind's gallery of external reflections. Charles Cooley called it the looking glass self. You imagine how you appear to others, imagine their judgment, and develop your identity accordingly. But those imagined judgments are as real as the scars they leave. As a child, you learned to smile when caregivers smiled. Their approval was the first mirror you faced. Their frown was your worst nightmare. That social mirror taught you who you were allowed to be. But as you grew, the mirror multiplied. School corridors, family dinners, social media feeds, all became reflective surfaces, bouncing yourself back at you, splintered and reassembled by strangers' opinions. You learned to edit, to prune, to curate, until the image that stared back was unrecognizable. Each like, each comment, each swipe becomes a chisel, shaping your identity. You adjust your posture, your clothing, your words to earn approval, and approval tastes addictive. You chase it like a drug, tuning your reflection to suit the algorithm's eye. There's a neurological twist to this story. Mirror neurons fire when you watch someone else's emotion. Joy, pain, fear, they ignite inside your brain as if you experience them firsthand. Watching someone smile online can make you feel momentary happiness. The mirror in your mind is not glass, it's human wiring. Last week, you walked past a storefront, overheard a stranger whisper about your outfit, and turned to catch a glimpse of yourself reflected in the glass. In that flash of mirrored chatter, you felt that comment settle into your posture, your mood, your sense of self. A single whispered judgment echoing in the window can rewrite your confidence for hours. Advertisers exploit this wiring masterfully. They plaster billboards with polished lives, tantalize you with curated images of perfection. Your brain says, "I want that." The mirror has convinced you that happiness lives in that perfect body, that luxury car, that flawless lifestyle. Desire becomes your constant companion. But the mirror never shows the cracks behind the polish. You don't see the hours spent editing, the insecurities hidden in backstage chaos. You see only what you're allowed to see, a shiny veneer, and you yearn for it as though it were truth. Algorithms have become mirrors so precise you never escape them. Every click, every linger, every pause is measured and reflected back at you in the form of targeted suggestions designed to nudge your choices. Online, you don't just see yourself, you see an idealized version programmed to keep you clicking, buying, and believing. Digital filters warp your face in real time, smoothing wrinkles, plumping lips, brightening eyes. You press record and watch your reflection morph into an ideal. A fleeting high surges through your veins, and then you crave it again. The mirror demands perfection, and you obey. Even the mirror on your dresser has its own agenda. Vanity brands place their logos below the glass, silently suggesting your worth is tied to consumption. You might step back to appreciate your reflection, but your eyes drift to the name etched in the frame, a reminder that identity can be purchased. Over time, the boundary between the reflected self and the real self blurs. You begin to evaluate your worth by the brightness of your highlights and the precision of your angles. You forget the feeling of unedited skin, the light in your genuine smile. The real you becomes a ghost hovering behind a crafted mask. This mirror is also a trap. It distorts reality until you can't trust what you see. Body dysmorphia tightens its grip as you find flaws where none exist. Anxiety twists every glance into a verdict. Even the act of looking becomes an ordeal. When you start believing in the mirror's portrayal, you begin to live it. You choose your clothes, your words, your circle to maintain the reflection you crave. Your life becomes a performance on an endless stage where the mirror is both director and critic, and you obey its script without question. But what if you stepped away? What if you shattered the mirror's power by refusing to see yourself through its fractured lens? You could close the app, turn away from the glass, and for a moment remember who you were before you learned to measure yourself by 1,000 external eyes. Rediscovering that unfiltered self feels like coming home. You recognize the warmth of your own face without digital enhancements. You hear your own laughter without echo of validation. You find solace in imperfection. Breaking the mirror doesn't destroy your identity. It liberates it. It reminds you that your worth isn't balanced on the scale of likes or frozen in a pixelated gaze. It pulses in your voice, in your heartbeat, in the choices that you make when nobody's watching. The mirror that shapes you extends beyond glass and screens. It lives in every gaze that lingers on your shadow, every expectation that tugs at your posture, every judgment that colors your inner voice. It's woven into the fabric of social rules, of cultural norms, of digital habits. You can turn the mirror into a tool instead of a tyrant. Use journaling as an unfiltered mirror for your thoughts. Seek feedback from trusted voices who reflect your essence rather than exploit your insecurity. Build your own mirror with compassion, empathy, and honesty, and watch your true self emerge. But remember this, you are more than a reflection. You have the power to choose which mirrors you face and which you shatter. You can step into the world without worrying how it wants to see you, and instead show up how you want to be. Let the next moment of reflection be a choice, not a compulsion, and let your true self stand free of every mirrored lie. Next, you won't believe how a store name can echo through your memories and feel as comforting as home. Have you ever wandered down an unfamiliar street, only to feel a sudden sense of ease when you saw the bright sign above a small shop? As you draw closer, your heart relaxes, tension in your shoulders melting away. You don't even remember hearing about this place before, yet the name on its wooden plaque feels as warm and welcoming as a childhood living room. That flicker of recognition isn't coincidence. It's a carefully designed emotional trigger, a hidden force that convinces you this storefront is your second home, your sanctuary of comfort. That instinctive pull you feel is called the mere exposure effect. Psychologists discovered decades ago that the more we encounter a word, symbol, or face, the more we prefer it, even if we don't consciously recall seeing it. It happens invisibly, like a secret handshake between your mind and the billboard designers. So, when a store repeats its name across signs, bus stops, and social media feeds, it embeds itself deep in your subconscious. You don't need to think about it. You already know you like it more than the new shop down the road. Picture the haze of warm light spilling from behind glass doors, the crisp logo stamped on every shopping bag, the soft hum of music you didn't know you recognized. You're drawn in by what feels like a magnet of memory. The ambience whispers safety. You feel seen, you feel understood. You feel at home. Each design choice, from font curves to color palettes, speaks to an evolutionary craving for belonging. Brands tap into that craving, wrapping you in a cloak of comfort long before you open your wallet. So why does this matter? Because that comfort isn't free. It comes at a price far beyond your dollar bill. When a store name feels like home, you're more willing to buy things you don't need, forgive small inconveniences, and even defend the brand when friends complain. You become an unpaid ambassador, praising the chain's latest product and posting pictures online because it feels natural to share something that feels so familiar. Without realizing it, your behavior is being guided by a simple feeling of comfort. Imagine a local grocery called Hearthside Market. You pass its sign hundreds of times each month on your commute. One evening, tired and hungry, you make a quick turn through its sliding doors and find yourself selecting meals for the week, as if you were shopping for family Sunday dinner. You don't even check the prices. You assume they'll be fair because Hearthside Market feels like someplace that cares. But that feeling was meticulously built through subtle repetition, billboards that whispered its name, while you sat in traffic, community ads during your favorite podcast, even a friend's recommendation you almost forgot. Now consider global giants. How many golden arches or green sirens have you seen? You don't consciously tally them, but your brain has. Repetition breeds preference. Consumers crave predictability. In a world full of choices, a familiar name reduces mental effort. You feel safe choosing what you know. Even if a new cafe on the next block offers better coffee, you might ignore it because it doesn't carry the weight of familiarity. Your mind equates familiarity with reliability, and reliability with value, creating a powerful loop of loyalty designed by marketing psychologists. This isn't just about branding, it's about identity. When you choose a store with a familiar name, you're also choosing a story about yourself. You're signaling to others and to yourself that you belong to a certain tribe. Are you the loyal local who shops at Willow Lane Books? The trendsetter who can't resist the neon lights of Urban Thread Co. Each name you embrace becomes a fragment of your self-image. That sense of home can warp into an echo chamber, surrounding you with only those brands you already trust and stifling curiosity. But what if you looked closer at your instinct? What if you paused and asked why that sign pressed so gently against your memory? You might uncover countless ads you barely noticed, all whispering that same name, sculpting your actions. You might realize that what feels personal is actually premeditated. And if you never question it, that engineered comfort only tightens its hold, blurring the line between your genuine preferences and marketing's hidden agenda. And yet, we yearn for home. We crave it in a world that often feels transient and disconnected. Corporations know this ache better than we do. They borrow the language of hearth and heart, weaving it into storefronts with names like Home Harvest, Family Finds, and Comfort Corner. They co-opt the imagery of evenings spent by fireplace, laughter echoing through halls, gatherings centered around love and belonging. It's pure poetry, crafted in marketing labs, designed to lodge itself deep in your memory, so you'll choose them for that elusive taste of home. The implications are profound. Our built environments become stages for emotion, where every sign is a script we're meant to follow. Shopping stops becoming a mundane task and transforms into a ritual of identity reinforcement. We willingly enter these brand-made homes, satisfy our need for connection, and pay for the experience. But the real transaction isn't at the register. It happens in your mind, where familiarity, trust, and identity merge into a single force so powerful you might not even notice its presence. So next time you feel that bubble of contentment, when you glimpse a familiar store name, pause, feel the warmth, and allow your curiosity to spark. Then question it. Ask yourself what memories it's tapping into, what biases it's exploiting, and how your spending shifts when that name feels like home. You might start to see the cracks in the illusion. In doing so, you reclaim the most valuable thing of all, your autonomy and the power to choose authenticity. Because ultimately, home isn't defined by a logo or a tagline. Home is where you feel truly yourself, free from hidden strings. When a store name feels like home, it's time to imagine what genuine home would feel like without the marketing script. And if you start dissecting the warmth of those signs, you might discover the real force. Shaping your reality lies in your own capacity to question what feels familiar. But what happens when the distractions become impossible to dismiss, and the very background hum of life starts screaming in your ears? You wake before dawn, phone in hand, heart already racing. Each ping cuts through silence like a blade. The world beckons with its demands before you've even opened your eyes. This isn't a morning ritual. This is an assault, a symphony of noise that seeps into your skull, shaping your day before it begins. You believe those chirps and buzzers are harmless. A simple update, a friendly reminder. But every alert is a doorway to influence. A whispered suggestion that tugs at your attention, your mood, your perception. Each notification is a tiny hammer cracking your focus and pouring in the fragments of someone else's priorities. Beneath each tone lies a dopamine loop engineered to keep you hooked. Picture a room filled with static, a radio dial forever drifting between stations. You strain to find a signal, but the static never clears. In your mind, the same static pulses. Headlines blur into emotions. Opinions fuse into desires. You feel the pressure in your temples, a low hum feeding into every thought you have. The noise overwhelms the signal until you no longer notice. It just is. Why does it matter? Because noise collects your thoughts like rain gathers in a storm. It erodes the surfaces of your beliefs, carrying them away with the current of distraction. One moment you wanted clarity. The next you're angry without knowing why, scrolling without purpose, floating in a digital haze created for you. Your heart tightens as you realize you're angry at nothing and everything at once. And that haze is not random. It is designed. Algorithms listen to your heartbeat through the patterns of your digital life. They know what catches your eye, what sparks your envy, what swings your emotions like a pendulum. They feed you more outrage, more craving, more certainty wrapped in shallow arguments. They serve you more of exactly what you crave, and you become a puppet to your own desires, twisted by code. This isn't marketing. It's engineering. Every banner ad, every auto-played video, every trending hashtag has been tested to hijack your mind. It crafts a filter bubble that echoes your worst fears and amplifies your deepest urges. You think you chose that content, but really the content chose you, and when your identity is shaped by the algorithm, you lose sight of who you were before the noise began. You might think you have free will. You might pride yourself on resisting influence. Yet the moment you hesitate, the noise rushes in. The ping you dismiss turns into a pit of anxiety. The banner ad that you pass by changes the rhythm of your breathing. Your thoughts fracture under the pressure, surrendering to the current. And when your will falters, the system swoops in, offering easy answers. Every choice you make under the deafening buzz carries a hidden cost. Decision fatigue sets in like a slow poison. You flip coins in your mind for simple tasks, wearing down your willpower until even the smallest decisions feel impossible. In that state, the system steps in with ready-made solutions, and you accept them without question. What is comfort becomes control. This isn't just about wasted time. It is about who you become. Each fragment of distraction stitches a new pattern in your mind. Your brain learns to expect the next hit of noise, It disconnects from the quiet inner voice that once guided reflection, creativity, and genuine curiosity. And soon chaos feels safer than silence. But noise is not always external. It lives inside you, the judgments you repeat, the worries you clutch, the doubts you nurture. Those inner echoes are just as loud, just as insistent. When you ignore them, they grow. They clutter your mind with endless emergencies, imaginary crises, and voices that are never kind. Every insecurity becomes a scream, drowned only by new distractions. Imagine clearing that clutter for a single moment. Silence is more than absence of sound. It is presence of thought. In silence you hear the tremor in your own voice, the pulse in your lungs, the truth underneath your fears. It feels fragile at first, like ice over a dark lake, but it holds you. It holds your attention, and in that space you find the shape of your own purpose. Resisting noise is a radical act. It means choosing boredom over amusement, choosing discomfort over distraction. It means facing the hollow ache where once you hid, but in that ache you rediscover your own voice. Every thought begins to matter again. Every choice feels alive. The power you thought lost returns in the stillness. You are not a passive receiver. You can tune the dial. You can decide what deserves your attention. It may feel impossible at first, like turning down the wind, but each moment of silence strengthens the muscle of your focus. Each refusal of noise chips away at the power it holds over you. You become the conductor of your own mind. What would you find in the space left behind by the noise? Perhaps an idea that has been waiting for your full attention. Perhaps a feeling that has been buried beneath your own worst fears. Perhaps a spark of purpose that you abandoned when the world screamed louder. Maybe it is the sound of your own curiosity, calling you back to life. Noise will always be there. It is the price of living in a connected world. But you can choose to listen only when it matters. You can bring the noise into harmony, instead of letting it drown you. You can make space for the questions that truly define you. And in that choice lies your freedom. The noise you can't ignore is not a curse. It's a test, a challenge to reclaim your mind in the face of relentless distraction. When you master it, you free yourself to think, to feel, and to exist on your own terms. And that is a power worth seizing. Soon you'll discover what happens when your phone picks your mood. Have you ever reached for your phone the moment you wake, feeling calm 1 second, restless the next? Imagine the weight of your device pressing against your palm, its glass surface reflecting your sleepy face. You tap the screen and suddenly your breath quickens. A cascade of images, words, and notifications wash over you, pulling your mind from serene dawn to anxious anticipation before you even look out the window. It happens so fast you barely notice. One notification about a breaking news alert floods you with dread. A scroll through an endless feed dials up excitement, envy, or despair. Your mood is no longer yours. It's borrowed from a stream of content, engineered to evoke the strongest emotional reaction. Every like and share calibrated to keep you hooked, reactive, and craving more. Think about the last time you opened an app and felt a surge of joy at a friend's post, or a pang of insecurity at someone else's highlight reel. That surge isn't random. It's a designed spike. Algorithms monitor how long you linger on certain posts, how quickly you tap to comment, then deliver more of what triggers you. They aren't helping you, they're hijacking your emotions. Notifications are tiny trumpets announcing your failures and triumphs. A ding for a new message floods you with relief. A ping for a missed call fills you with anxiety. You might believe you chose to check your phone, but really you responded to emotional cues implanted by code. Code that lives inside every app to manipulate, to guide, to control how you feel in every moment. Dopamine, your brain's reward chemical, becomes a puppet's strings. Every like, comment, and share lights up your neural pathways, reinforcing the habit. You chase that feeling like a moth to a flame. Fear of missing out amplifies it, whispering that you'll fall behind if you don't stay engaged. And so you scroll endlessly, feeding the very mechanism that feeds you emotional highs and lows. You're not imagining it. In 2014, Facebook ran an experiment on nearly 700,000 users, filtering news feeds to show more positive or negative content. People's emotions shifted accordingly. More sad posts led to sad comments. More happy posts led to more joyful reactions. You weren't special, you were a data point in a worldwide mood experiment. Your feelings tweaked like knobs on a control panel. Your phone is smarter than you think. Sensors track your movements, listen to your voice, measure your heart rate. Location data tells it where you go and what you do. It knows when you're at a gym, at home, or in traffic. These signals feed machine learning models that predict whether you're stressed, relaxed, or bored. And then apps adjust. They serve content to fit your guest emotion. Facial recognition can read your expression as you linger on a video. Keystroke speed reveals your frustration. Even ambient light sensors hint at whether you're in bed or outdoors. Every little detail is collected, analyzed, and used to tailor what you see. It's intimacy posed as convenience. It's intimacy posed as convenience. You willingly carry this spy in your pocket, offering emotional data in exchange for entertainment, connection, and so-called convenience. These data-driven feedback loops create filter bubbles around your feelings. If you're feeling down, the apps feed you more somber content. If you're curious, they feed you puzzles and quizzes. This reinforcement builds a personalized mood chamber, a mood chamber that adjusts the temperature of your emotions, just enough to keep you inside, comfortable but contained, curious but never quite satisfied. Picture your mind as a garden, full of wildflowers, weeds, and hidden seeds. Your phone is the gardener. It prunes thoughts, fertilizes certain emotions, and uproots others. You might believe you decide what to cultivate, but the gardener's the one with the shears and the fertilizer. And you rarely notice until you step back and realize that the garden looks entirely different than you remember planting. Behind the screen stand advertisers, data brokers, and technology giants. They tweak sliders, test headlines, and purchase attention in real time. They profit from your emotional reactions. Angry users share more. Fearful users click more. Half-truths and shocking headlines stir outrage, ensuring you stay hooked. Your phone isn't neutral. It's a mood regulator designed to maximize your engagement and, in turn, their profits. The cost isn't just fractured attention, it's fractured self. When your emotions are manipulated, your sense of identity blurs. You start to believe your reactive self is your true self. You forget the calm morning before you opened the app. You forget how it felt to be present without a digital tug on your emotions. And once that anchor is gone, real life begins to feel dull in comparison. But what happens when you fight back? You disable notifications only to feel phantom vibrations in your pocket. You delete the app only to find yourself reinstalling it the next day. You vow to limit screen time only to break the promise under the weight of boredom or anxiety. The algorithms adapt faster than you can resist. They learn your patterns, your weaknesses, your cravings. Digital well-being features promise relief. Weekly reports, usage reminders, app timers. They're like bandages on a wound that keeps reopening. Sure, they help a bit, but the real battle rages deeper, in your habits and in the designs you never notice. You have to confront the persuasive design itself, the infinite scroll, the autoplay, the notification badges itching at your brain. Imagine withdrawing for a moment, turning your phone face down, blocking apps at certain hours, creating tech-free spaces. In those moments of silence, you feel something you haven't felt in a long time, yourself. The panic might rise. Your stomach might clench, but then something else emerges. Clarity, real feelings, unfiltered. Boredom gives way to creativity. A thought, a breath, a stillness that apps can't replicate. Regaining control of your mood isn't about rejecting technology. It's about resetting the relationship. Technology should serve your emotional needs, not dictate them. It's about mindfulness, pausing before you tap, noticing how you really feel. It's about reclaiming your mind from glass and code, discovering that true satisfaction comes not from algorithms, but from moments lived on your own terms. Your phone is not your friend when it picks your mood. It mirrors the feelings its makers choose to amplify. You think you're in control, but your mood might be someone else's experiment, someone else's profit center. The next time you feel sudden dread or unexplained excitement, remember your emotions are yours unless you let your phone decide. Coming up, you'll uncover how your expectations sculpt your reality, making you see only what you already believe. Some mornings you wake expecting the first drop of coffee to taste like heaven, the faces in the crowd to mirror your mood, and each day to unfold the way you scripted it in your mind. That invisible script is written by every memory you carry, every conclusion you've ever drawn, every hidden bias that hums beneath your thoughts, shaping what you believe you're seeing. When you glimpse a form in the shadows, your heart races before your eyes confirm the shape. Your mind fills in blanks with whatever it deems most likely: a friend, a threat, a familiar figure. The rush of certainty that follows feels like truth itself, but it is a mirage crafted from your expectations, not the world around you. Your brain is a masterful storyteller, eager to conserve energy. It predicts what comes next, using past experiences as shorthand. When reality aligns with those predictions, you barely notice. When it doesn't, you strain to dismiss the odd detail or cling to whatever fits. Those mental shortcuts keep your mind racing smoothly, but they come at the cost of true clarity. Consider staring at ink blots, hoping to see a butterfly, and suddenly spotting fluttering wings where there are none. That phenomenon, called pareidolia, is playful when you laugh at cloud shapes. But it can veer into peril when your mind expects danger in every unexpected noise, filling silence with threats that don't exist. Expectation can be a guardian or a jailer. Every glance you take is filtered through a sieve, woven from your beliefs. You hear phrases that confirm your worldview and ignore the rest. You interpret neutral gestures through a lens polished by past hurts or hopes. Conversations become dances where each partner anticipates the next step. What you see is rarely unfiltered. It's the world as your mind insists. It must be. This unseen filter becomes most treacherous when it frames your interactions. If you anticipate contempt, you hear sarcasm in gentle feedback. If you expect praise, you feel triumph in even the smallest nod. Your own posture and tone broadcast that forecast to others who respond in kind. Your expectations become self-fulfilling prophecies, scripting your social reality before a word is spoken. Imagine walking into a room, convinced you'll be judged. Your shoulders tighten, your voice falls flat, and every glance feels like accusation. People respond to those signals, shrinking away or meeting your tension with their own. Suddenly, the room feels hostile, as if your suspicions summoned hostility out of thin air. You created what you feared by believing it first. Breaking free means catching the mind in the act. Notice the jolt when reality surprises you, when someone compliments you without sarcasm, when a shadow vanishes into empty space. Those shocks are fleeting reminders that your brain is only half the story. They offer a rare glimpse of raw experience, unedited by assumptions, if you can hold on to them long enough to question your beliefs. Ask yourself what you expect to see next. What story are the shapes in the darkness telling you? Which patterns do you cling to out of habit? Then look for details that contradict that story. Listen for words you usually dismiss. Seek the contradictions you normally ignore. Every piece of unexpected evidence is a clue that your lens is tinted and needs cleaning. Curiosity is your greatest ally. Replace certainty with a question. What else could this be? What if my assumptions are wrong? That tiny shift from dogma to doubt widens your aperture. You begin to notice textures and nuances you overlooked. The world doesn't change, your perception does. Clarity follows when you let go of your tight grip on what must happen. This practice demands courage. The mind resists uncertainty, like a frightened child clinging to a safe blanket. For a moment, you might feel lost, stripped of familiar signposts. That discomfort is proof you're dismantling old filters. It signals an opening, a chance to experience reality in its raw form. Embrace that uneasy freedom and watch your vision expand. As your expectations loosen, you'll find yourself noticing signals you once erased. You'll hear empathy in a stranger's tone that you flagged as indifference. You'll see potential in risks you overlooked because you assumed failure. You'll sense opportunity in ambiguity rather than lurking threat. The world isn't changing. Your perspective is broadening, unveiling dimensions you never knew existed. Real clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through repeated acts of mindful observation. Each time you catch a misperception, you chip away at the tinted coating, obscuring your mind. Over time, you'll face fewer surprises. Once jarring contradictions become gentle reminders to stay vigilant, to keep searching for the unseen, the unscripted, the unpredictable. Perception is a power and a responsibility. When you recognize how your expectations steer your senses, you reclaim agency. You no longer walk through life bound by an invisible script. You learn to meet each moment on its own terms, open to the richness it offers. You begin to perceive reality not as a reflection of yourself, but as a vast landscape waiting to be explored. Soon you'll glimpse the hidden playbook, outlining the rules you can't find, waiting just beneath the surface. Have you ever taken a step, only to feel a tug that you cannot explain? Something outside your senses, pulling you back without a rope or chain. You move forward, believing in your freedom, until you test the boundary and feel a click around your mind. Invisible handcuffs made of expectations, instincts, and whispers you never consciously heard. They exist to keep you on the path you never chose. From your first breath, you learned guidelines that no one ever wrote down. Smile here, speak softly there. Stay within invisible lines, traced by tradition and fear of judgment. You follow without question because belonging feels safer than solitude. The rules slip into your instincts until they become your identity. When you step off that tightrope, chaos feels more dangerous than compliance, so you never question your restraints. And warnings taught you to punish every impulse that threatened the status quo. You build walls around your curiosity to fit the mold you don't even see. Every society functions on countless unspoken agreements. You know when to laugh, who to respect, which thoughts to hide. A glance, a silence, a nod, they enforce conformity more fiercely than any law. You police your own behavior, adjusting tone, posture, and opinion to mirror the group. In that moment, you are both the jailer and the prisoner. These hidden vows become your compass, guiding you without your awareness, and each hidden vow tightens its grip as you trade authenticity for acceptance. Walking through social spaces feels like navigating a labyrinth with walls you cannot see. At dinner, you pause before reaching for the last slice. In conversations, you measure every word as if diffusing a silent mine. Your body tenses at subtle cues, a raised eyebrow, a shift in posture, an unspoken warning. You adapt, shift, conform, believing it is all natural. Yet every step is dictated by rules you never penned, and the corridors shift endlessly, forcing you to relearn the maze at every turn. A more insidious presence lingers in the background, the algorithm ghost. Every click, view, and like feeds its hunger, and it offers you a reflection tailored to your tastes. It shows you more of what you already believe and removes what challenges you. Content narrows until your world becomes a hall of mirrors, echoing only your own voice. The code dictates what you think matters, yet you think you chose it. You celebrate its precision, unaware that it draws new walls around your mind. Words themselves carry unseen mandates. Political slogans, corporate catchphrases, media buzzwords, they slip into your vocabulary and reshape your thinking. You repeat them without realizing their hidden instructions. Success, freedom, beauty, they all come with fine print you never read. Speaking the right phrases grants you belonging. Speaking the wrong ones banishes you. Language becomes both tool and trap, scripting your reality in whispers you cannot erase. Each phrase is a brick in the prison of your perception. Beliefs live in the mirror you hold to your mind. You see a reflection forged by culture, family, peers, an image you mistook for yourself. Convictions crystallize until they feel unshakable, even when they contradict experience. Challenging them feels like self-betrayal. But what if those beliefs were never yours? What if they were handed down like heirlooms, tarnished by others' biases and fears, waiting to be reclaimed or shattered? Then comes the moment of revelation, a sudden crack in the surface. You hear a dissenting voice or stumble upon a forbidden idea, and the smooth facade fractures. Patterns emerge in your thoughts that once felt natural. You see the strings, the ghost, the unspoken vows, the shifting corridors. Your mind jolts as you realize freedom was never a state of being, but a question you never asked. The ground tilts beneath your certainty, exposing the hidden traps. That awakening is a knife that cuts both ways. It slices through comfort and leaves a raw wound of uncertainty. You feel exposed, naked before a world you thought you knew. Anxiety crashes in, and you long for the safety of old rules, even if they were chains. Yet, this pain is proof that you are alive. It is proof that you can change the story scripted for you. With that insight comes power. Power to question every whisper, every nudge, every invisible impulse that once dictated your steps. You begin to see the fine print beneath life's terms and conditions. You can choose which instructions to follow and which to tear apart. The pen is in your hand, though the page is vast and unmarked. Writing a new code is terrifying and exhilarating beyond measure. This blank page filled with possibility invites you to redraw the boundaries, but the mind resists. It clings to the known even as it yearns for freedom. The labyrinth fights back with familiar fears, fear of judgment, fear of isolation, fear of chaos. Each hidden rule whispers, Stay here. It's safe. Yet every whisper hides a trap. You learn to silence that voice, to embrace uncertainty like a guide rather than a threat. Only then can you roam beyond unseen chains. Choosing new rules is an exercise in courage. You look into the maze knowing it may never end. You test limits, daring to step off prescribed paths. Sometimes you stumble and draw new lines in sand that wash away with a single tide. Sometimes you find corridors that lead you deeper than you ever imagined. The important part is not reaching a destination, but forging the compass that serves your own truth. This journey rewrites every part of you. What felt like destiny becomes choice. What seemed like nature reveals itself as artifice. You carry an invisible key, unlocking doors others never see. Each step forward is both unlearning and creation. The rules you can't find no longer bind you, they become stepping stones. You remain free to follow, free to rebel, free to write the code that shapes your reality. And soon you'll glimpse how the quiet chorus of the crowd is already guiding your every step. You step onto the subway platform and find yourself in a moving river of people. Every footstep falls in rhythm with the one in front. Every glance flips where the crowd looks. You feel the momentum pulling you forward, nudging your elbow, steering your path without a second thought. At that moment, you're not an individual but a leaf on a current, carried by an invisible force. You think you chose this route, this direction. But did you? A few weeks ago, you might have decided to take a quieter street home, one you'd only ever walked alone. But when half the commuters veered right, you veered right too. No protest, no hesitation. You trusted their instinct over yours, and sure enough, you arrived, safe and on schedule. Yet, you followed without question. You traded your own judgment for the comfort of the majority. Why do we do this? Because belonging feels safe. We crave approval, acceptance, and the implicit promise that the group knows better. When you fold yourself into a crowd, the burden of choice dissolves. You're no longer responsible for every misstep or wrong turn. The crowd takes the blame, the credit, and the uneasy glow of collective confidence. You hide behind its shared certainty and feel a warm cloak of security draped around your shoulders. But comfort has its price. In moments of doubt, when you glance at a dimly lit intersection and see 100 shadowed shapes moving one way, you convince yourself they must know the way. Their certainty becomes your guide. Even when a tiny voice inside whispers you should pause, examine the map, or consider another path, the momentum of the crowd drowns it out. Your own intuition fades beneath the roar of collective movement. This isn't just about subway platforms. It's the same force shaping your opinions, your purchases, your politics. When everyone around you celebrates a new trend, you nod along, adding it to your list of likes and follows. When a product becomes viral, you buy it almost reflexively, trusting the wisdom of the crowd more than your own needs. When an opinion dominates your feed, you lean in, repeating it until it becomes your own, even if you never paused to question its truth. At its core, this force is the bandwagon effect. We see people moving in one direction and assume there's a good reason. We follow because we don't want to stand out, be judged, or risk isolation. And once we're on board, we shout encouragement, reinforcing the illusion that the path is correct. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. More followers breed more followers, until skepticism is swallowed by the tide. Psychologists call it de-individuation, the loss of self in the group. Your unique identity dissolves in the sea of faces, anonymity, and shared purpose blur personal responsibility. You may behave in ways you'd never dare alone, cheering in stadiums, chanting slogans, even participating in actions you'd privately condemn. Because within the crowd, morality and caution are redefined by the collective pulse. Consider the frenzy of a market bubble. Investors pour money into an asset, skyrocketing beyond reason, fearing they'll miss out if they hesitate. Rational analysis gives way to the primal urge to follow the swarm. When the tide turns, everyone rushes for the exit, and the same crowd that lifted prices plunges them into freefall. Your fate becomes inseparable from the masses, and you discover that the group's momentum can carry you to dizzying heights or hurl you into chaos. Online, the effect multiplies. Algorithms detect what's popular and amplify it, flooding your screen with trending topics, trending faces, trending opinions. You don't just follow the crowd, you're nudged by invisible code into its stream. Every notification is a whisper. Everyone's talking about this. You should too. You surrender your attention without realizing it, and your mind becomes fertile ground for ideas you never even chose. Yet, there's a deeper truth. The crowd's path isn't random. It's shaped by those who know how to steer it. Marketers testing ads, influencers curating desires, politicians pulling strings behind the scenes. They plant seeds of thought, then watch as they sprout and spread. You think the movement is organic, but it was carefully nurtured from the start. You're carrying out a design you never opted into. And so your life unfolds in echoes of others. Careers, relationships, ambitions, they mirror the successes and failures you observe around you. You follow the graduation photos, the engagement announcements, the highlight reels of friends who built startups or traveled to exotic places. You chase the milestones of the collective dream, believing they lead to fulfillment, only to wonder why something still feels missing when you arrive. This isn't meant to shame you. It's the nature of being human, a social animal wired to connect, belong and follow. But recognition is the first step toward reclaiming your path. When you sense the tug of the crowd, pause, notice the quiet undercurrent of your own thoughts, trying to rise. Listen to them, even as the crowd's roar tugs at your sleeve. Stepping off the path of the many is uncomfortable. You'll feel exposed, alone, and vulnerable. The current you once rode will swirl without you, whispering doubts, reminding you that you're missing out. But that discomfort is the price of authenticity. Each step you take alone is a declaration of your true self, a map drawn by your own hand instead of dictated by faceless numbers. And here's the secret: others will follow. Once you break free, you become a beacon. Quiet resistance inspires curiosity. When one person steps aside, it reminds the crowd that they have a choice. Change doesn't start with the masses at full speed. It begins with a single person daring to stand still, look around and decide their own direction. You might never rid yourself of the crowd's influence entirely, but you can choose when to let it push you and when to resist. Choose to follow when it lifts you up, but choose intentionally, consciously. Let the current guide you only when it aligns with your true map, your own compass. Because the path you carve alone, step by step, is the one you'll look back on without regret. But what if the force shaping your every step isn't the crowd at all, but the silent brush of fear painting your future? You wake up, and the horizon of tomorrow looms like a gathering storm, each dark cloud an omen whispering disaster to come. Your heart hammers as you imagine every possible catastrophe, from shattered relationships to ruined ambitions, as though the future were already writing its tragedy before you've even begun. You cling to every dreaded possibility, convinced these images are carved in stone. That sense of looming dread seeps into your breath and your blood, marking each heartbeat with a promise of pain, until you believe you are witnessing what will be, not merely fearing what could be. In your mind, you become an artist wielding fear as pigment, mixing memories of past failures with the anxieties of today to create a canvas so bleak it feels undeniable. Each brushstroke drags a shadow across your path, staining every hope before it has a chance to spark. You trace the outline of every worst-case scenario, convinced that drawing it into existence makes it more real. But what feels like prophecy is just your own apprehension given shape, a masterpiece of dread born from the darkest corners of your imagination. Small worries transform into towering threats in the space between thought and breath. A late response to a message becomes proof of abandonment. A minor mistake at work spins into evidence you're sliding toward failure. Your thoughts sprint down improbable paths until the slightest misstep feels like the precursor to your downfall. This tendency to magnify the unlikely creates momentum for your anxiety, feeding doubt until it grows into a beast too large to ignore. Fear finds allies in every corner of your world. On social feeds, you see snapshots of success, each perfect moment a mirror exposing your own insecurities. News outlets blare warnings of global crises, each headline echoing in your mind as confirmation that disaster is everywhere. Friends commiserate over small troubles, nodding in agreement as you describe your fears, giving them legitimacy. With every affirmation, your dread amplifies, drowning out quieter voices of reason, until calm becomes a distant memory you can barely recall. The most brutal trick of this painted future is that it shapes your actions, steering you toward the very outcomes you dread. Expect rejection, and you withdraw from connection. Anticipate failure, and your confidence rusts before you even begin. Every choice is weighed down by the assumption of catastrophe, so you behave as though the worst has already happened. In that way, fear writes its own script, dictating every scene and ensuring the ending matches the darkest strokes on your canvas. Paralysis seeps in as the final layer of paint. Decisions feel like stepping onto a frozen lake that could crack beneath you at any moment. You analyze every angle, waiting for absolute certainty that may never come. While you linger in that stagnant water, opportunities drift past like ice floes too distant to reach. Your survival instinct convinces you that staying motionless is safer than risking the unknown, but the longer you wait, the colder and more immobilized you become. But what if you could step back and see this creation for what it is, an illusion forged in anxiety rather than a destiny set in stone? Imagine observing your own fearful painting from a safe distance, noting how the colors bleed where your imagination ran wild. In that moment, you recognize you are both artist and observer, capable of altering the composition with every new decision. That realization cracks the spell. Fear holds over you, opening a path to reclaim your power. Reclaiming the brush means testing those assumptions with small acts of courage. Perhaps you reach out to a friend despite doubting their response, or you speak up in a meeting, even though your voice quivers. Each brave choice adds a stroke of possibility, chipping away at the fortress of dread until unexpected hues of hope emerge. Over time, the painting shifts, transforming from a portrait of despair into a mosaic of potential, reminding you that the future is never written in fear alone. Next, you will discover why you trust what you know and how that trust can trap you in its own illusion. Have you ever paused at the edge of a familiar path, the one you've walked 100 times, and wondered why every step feels certain? That certainty is seductive. It whispers that what you know is true. But what if the comfort you feel is not proof of fact, but the echo of repetition? What if every memory, every belief, every inkling you trust is built on something far less solid than you imagine? This is the hidden force that shapes the foundation of your reality, the unspoken faith you place in the known. Imagine seeing a statement repeated over and over, a slogan on a billboard, a phrase in conversation, a line in an advertisement. At first you might hesitate. The second time you pause a bit longer. By the fifth, it sounds undeniable, as though you discovered it yourself. This isn't magic, it's the familiarity bias. Repetition clones belief until you accept it. The more your brain encounters something, the more it assumes it must be real. Familiarity feels like truth, even when it's nothing more than a cunning trick of memory. When words glide smoothly off your tongue, when fonts are clear and language flows, your mind relaxes. Clear becomes correct. Complex becomes suspicious. This is cognitive ease at work, a silent persuader. A message in crisp black on white gains an unearned aura of authority. Meanwhile, dense text or awkward phrasing triggers resistance, doubt. You've likely dismissed a valid idea simply because it felt awkward. Your brain, ever lazy, prefers effortless processing. It draws comfort from clarity and distrusts anything that demands more attention, even if that thing carries a deeper truth. But once an idea slips into familiar territory, your brain hones in on every detail that confirms it. You sift through information like a prospector, panning for gold, discarding any speck of evidence that doesn't glitter. Doubts vanish, questions fade. You see patterns where none exist because your mind is desperate to reinforce what it already believes. This confirmation bias cements the framework of your reality, weaving a tapestry of convenience that hides contradictions and silences skeptical voices. Before you know it, your beliefs feel as unshakable as concrete. Then there's the allure of authority. A crisp uniform, a polished title, a confident tone, elements of power that trigger instinctive deference. You're wired to trust experts because deep in your evolutionary history, survival often depended on following knowledgeable leaders. Today, that instinct persists, nudging you to accept opinions on climate, finance, health, or culture, simply because someone in a lab coat or behind a podium said so. The flip side is dangerous. Charisma and credentials can mask ignorance. Blind trust in authority can keep you locked in illusions crafted by someone else. Look around at your social circles, online feeds, news alerts. When you see countless others nodding in agreement, liking a post, lining up at a trendy spot, a silent signal pulses through your mind. If they trust it, so should you. This social proof feels like collective wisdom, but it often springs from the same well of repetition and ease. Herd mentality thrives on familiarity. When everyone whispers that something is true, doubt feels like betrayal. And so you surrender your skepticism to avoid standing alone, clinging to the false safety of the majority. But memory, your most treasured archive, is far from infallible. Every recall reshapes the story, filling gaps with bits of assumption, desire, or suggestion. You're convinced you remember exactly where you learned something or who told you a fact, yet often your recollections are stitched together from fragments, influenced by emotion or later information. Confidence swells with every retelling, but accuracy plummets. You trust memories as if they were crystal recordings, unaware that they are more like stories retold around a campfire, vivid, compelling, yet ultimately malleable. Emotions amplify the trust you place in what you know. When a story touches your heart, sparks anger, or ignites fear, your brain flags it as significant, stamping it with irrefutable truth. The more emotionally charged, the less likely you are to question it. You carry these charged beliefs like badges, letting them guide decisions and shape your view of the world. Emotion-driven conviction feels righteous, even holy, but it can distort perception, drowning nuance in waves of fervor. You trust your feelings, yet they can be as misleading as a mirage. Welcome to your personalized universe, curated by algorithms that learn your tastes and biases. Every click, every like, every share becomes data fueling an echo chamber. Here, your existing beliefs bounce back to you in an endless loop, each repetition tightening their grip. Unpleasant or contradictory information melts away, edited out by unseen hands. You trust this reality because it comforts you, confirms you, shields you. But in doing so, it blinds you. You think you're exploring the world when you're really trapped in a digital hall of mirrors. In the face of chaos, certainty feels like an anchor. Even a flawed belief serves better than a void of doubt. You cling to dogma, political, religious, cultural, because knowing keeps fear at bay. Certainty may be an illusion, but it's a potent balm for anxiety. You wear it like armor, believing it shields you from confusion. Yet that armor also insulates you from growth. Genuine understanding demands discomfort. To tear down the scaffolding of your certainties is to invite vulnerability, and most of us would rather concede truth than feel exposed. But what if you began to question every comfortable conviction, to treat every belief as a hypothesis, not a decree? Imagine pausing in the moment of recognition, slowing the rush when you instinctively trust a fact. What if you nudged your brain to scan for the unfamiliar, to solicit the dissenting voice you'd normally silence? This intentional dissonance feels awkward, even threatening at first. Your mind rebels against the extra effort, the doubt, but it's only by fracturing the illusion of unearned trust that you can glimpse the raw contours of reality. Understanding why you trust what you know is the first step toward reclaiming your mind. It's a journey from passive acceptance to active inquiry. It means embracing uncertainty, welcoming friction, and learning to savor questions more than answers. You begin to see knowledge not as a static trophy, but as a living, evolving process. In that space of unknowing, new insights germinate. The world doesn't rest on the pillars of certainty, but on the dynamic interplay of doubt, exploration, and discovery. And just beyond these questions, you'll discover the silent narrator inside your mind, guiding every belief you hold. You wake before dawn, eyelids drawn closed, but your mind already racing. A voice stirs in the shadows of your thoughts, soft but insistent, guiding every fleeting sensation. It narrates your dreams before they fade, whispers doubts before the sun has even risen. It's there when you reach for your phone, when you search for meaning in the silence. Have you ever stopped to realize that this voice might not be yours at all? Every choice you make, no matter how trivial, carries its echo. Should you brew coffee or tea? Should you take the main road or the back streets? Before you even decide, the whisper threads itself through your mind. It promises safety if you stay small and bland, or excitement if you dare risk. It praises your victories and magnifies your failures. It murmurs possible futures before you step into them, coloring your anticipation with hope or dread. It's the director of an unseen play where you're both lead actor and captive audience. When you stand before a mirror at midday, that voice is already judging your reflection. It catalogues every blemish, every hesitant tilt of your head, every line that betrays a worry you'd rather hide. It insists you look less, speak less, be less, so you fit an invisible mold. The narrative it spins becomes your reality, warping the world until you see only what it allows you to see. But what if you paused and asked it why it feels entitled to your image? In social rooms full of laughter, that voice transforms your skin to armor. It warns you they're mocking your every move, that their smiles are masks hiding contempt. You nod politely, voice clamoring for permission to retreat. You cancel plans, shrink into corners, convince yourself solitude is preferable to rejection. And all the while, the world beyond your fear remains unchanged, yet you perceive it as hostile because you listen. This internal commentator wasn't forged in solitude. It was taught from childhood whispers, fleeting criticisms, and casual judgments. You recorded its first scripts. Each echo of disapproval engraved fresh lines in your psyche. Over time, those scripts loop on repeat, a scratchy record that never ceases. You become an archive of every harsh word ever spoken to you, a living fixture of distant voices replayed inside your skull. Sometimes it even masquerades as your own intuition. It isn't malicious, it believes it protects you. It urges you to play it safe, to avoid pain and disappointment. Stay within the lines, it whispers, so nothing bad can happen. But safety in its view means stagnation. It trades your potential for a comfortable certainty. It cultivates regret for every misstep, but never celebrates the leaps that could change everything. It's a caged comfort, sold as sanctuary. It's like a velvet prison that lulls you to sleep. Consider the power of prophecy. You speak into existence. Before an exam, you whisper that you'll fail. Anxiety swells until you can barely read the questions. Before a conversation, you convince yourself you'll stutter and stammer. Your words betray you. In relationships, you predict the worst, then behave accordingly, creating the very disasters you anticipated. This voice is the architect of self-fulfilling prophecies, because when you believe it, you build walls around your own fate. And the world outside feeds this voice. Media feeds its echo chamber. Every algorithm knows which fear to amplify, which comparison to highlight. Scrolling through curated snapshots of others' lives, you hear it murmur that you're falling behind, that you're never enough. Its volume crescendos with each notification ping. Its script is written in pixels and praises, in filters and followers. It leaves footprints in your mind long after you close the app. Awareness is the first strike against its hold. Notice the whisper without judgment. Name it the inner critic or the shadows within, and watch it shrink. Practice stepping back, as if from a dream, observing the narrator rather than drowning in its words. Challenge its declarations with facts, respond to its taunts with compassion. By creating space between you and that relentless commentator, you reclaim authorship of your own story. It might feel awkward at first, like learning to speak in a strange accent, but soon it becomes natural. Imagine silencing that chorus for a moment. The hush that follows might feel strange, even unsettling. But in that vacuum emerges your true voice, clear, curious, and unburdened. It doesn't demand perfection or promise easy answers. It simply observes, wonders, creates. It speaks in possibilities, not judgments. It invites you to step into uncertainty, to experiment, to learn, to grow. It reminds you that reality is not a fixed script, but a canvas waiting for your brush. You've lived too long under narratives, not of your own making. The voice you hear inside isn't destiny. It's a reflection of every doubt you've ever absorbed. You can decide which echoes to carry forward. You can choose the words you welcome, the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what's possible. Reality is co-authored by your beliefs, so be mindful of the voice you follow. Speak with intention, listen with kindness, and watch your world transform. In the next moment, you'll discover how the simplest hue can hijack your choices before you even realize it. Red is not just a color, it's a command, a cue, a trigger embedded deep inside your nervous system. You might think it's just light bouncing off surfaces, but your brain doesn't treat it that way. Red means stop. Red means danger. Red means power, sex, aggression. And you didn't choose this, your biology did. See, red bypasses reason. It hits your brain stem like a punch. When you see it, your heart rate ticks up. Your pupils dilate. Blood flow shifts. You become more alert, more reactive, more prone to act without thinking. The color changes nothing outside you, but it changes everything inside. Imagine walking into a room lit entirely in red, even without a sound. Your body braces. You feel it, don't you? A low-grade tension humming beneath your skin, as if something's about to happen, something urgent. That's not a mood. That's programming. It's not a choice, it's a response, and it's everywhere. Fast food chains use red because it triggers appetite. Emergency buttons, warning signs, stoplights, they all use red for a reason. They want your attention. They want your obedience. Red gets both. But it goes deeper than that. In sports, athletes wearing red win more often. In studies, people rate others as more attractive when they wear red. Even judges give harsher sentences when exposed to the color in subtle, ambient ways. Red doesn't just signal, it shapes decisions. And those decisions feel like your own, even when they're not. That's the trick. Red makes you act, but you believe you chose to. This isn't just some weird biological quirk. It's a vulnerability. One that marketers, architects, and even governments exploit. They don't need to convince you with words, they just need to control the palate. They understand something most people don't. If you control the environment, you control the behavior. We assume free will is a matter of choice. But how free are you when your choices are being preloaded by invisible cues? When the very hue of a room can nudge your aggression, your hunger, your sexual desire. You're not choosing, you're reacting. And red is just one color. Blue calms, green heals, yellow stimulates. Each one whispers something to your brain, guiding your emotions and decisions. You're being steered without ever knowing the wheel exists. Now ask yourself, how many of your choices are truly your own? When you picked that shirt, that logo, that path, was it preference or programming? This is not about paranoia. It's about perception. Because once you see the influence, you can't unsee it. You'll notice the colors of the news studio, the lighting in your favorite store, the layout of your social media apps. Every shade and tint chosen not for beauty, but for control. Aesthetic manipulation dressed as design. You've been trained to think color is decoration, but it's not, it's instruction. And the world you live in is built like a machine, every element tuned to elicit a response. You are the product of those responses. Even now, you might feel the tug, that slight unease, a sudden sharpness, just from thinking about red. That's how deep it runs. You don't just see it, you feel it, you become it. So what does it mean when a color can make you act? It means freedom isn't as free as you think. It means control doesn't need chains, it just needs contrast. It means your mind is open in ways you never imagined, and being rewritten in ways you never noticed. And if red can make you move, imagine what happens when your movements begin to speak for you. Because next, you'll discover how even the smallest gesture can scream. You step into a room. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle shift in posture, a glance held a moment longer than usual, a breath slightly deeper than expected. No one speaks. No one needs to, because in that silent instant, you've already said something. Every move you make sends signals, small ones, barely noticeable, but they speak louder than words ever could. The way you fold your arms, the pace at which you walk, whether you make eye contact, and for how long, all of it. A quiet language of dominance, insecurity, confidence, hesitation. The world reads you, even when you think it's not watching. We like to believe we control how we're perceived, that our words are enough, that our intentions carry the full story. But they don't, not even close. Humans evolved to read the slightest twitch in a stranger's expression, the microsecond delay before a handshake, the tiny lift of an eyebrow. Your biology is ancient, and it's constantly interpreting these signals, whether you realize it or not. You nod slightly when someone speaks. It tells them you agree, or at least that you're listening. You tilt your head, it shows curiosity. You lean in, and suddenly you're signaling closeness, interest, perhaps vulnerability. But pull away slightly, just a fraction, and that closeness begins to dissolve. These aren't choices you make consciously. They're habits, instincts, patterns deeply embedded in your nervous system. And the terrifying part, you're broadcasting even when you're silent. Especially when you're silent. A flicker of the eyes at the wrong moment can unravel trust. A pause too long after a question can make you seem uncertain, dishonest, or cold. People pick up on these micro-messages, whether they can explain them or not. They just feel something's off, and they're usually right. In relationships, a single gesture can shift an entire dynamic. Pulling away slightly during a hug, responding with a delay to a text, touching someone's shoulder with a bit too much familiarity. You didn't mean anything by it, but you meant something, whether you wanted to or not. The signal went out, and now it's shaping how they see you. Power, especially, is signaled in the smallest ways, in how slowly you move, how little you react. People with power don't rush, they don't over-explain. They pause, they hold stillness, and the room adjusts to them. Your body communicates what your mouth never needs to say. You can't fake this. If you try, it looks like acting. Because real authority doesn't come from imitating behaviors. It comes from the deep wiring beneath them. Even the way you sit in a chair matters. Crossed legs signal comfort, confidence, or dismissal, depending on the angle. Slouching might seem casual, but in the wrong room it screams disrespect. These things are not neutral. Nothing is. Your body speaks a dialect far older than language, and everyone around you is fluent, even if they don't know it. And here's the trap. You're doing it too. You read others. You react to their signals before you're even aware. You feel uneasy around someone not because of what they said, but how they moved, how their face didn't quite match their tone, how their smile lingered too long. You sensed something. Your body noticed. And you adjusted, backed away, smiled less, guarded more. This constant exchange of subtle moves and meanings is invisible but exhausting. It's why you feel drained after a social interaction, without knowing why. Because beneath every word, there's a second conversation happening. One of tension, status, attraction, defense. A chess game played with facial muscles, postures, distances, and if you learn to see it, you can start to control it. Not manipulate, but master. You can shift dynamics without saying a word. Make someone feel seen or insignificant, safe or wary. With the raise of an eyebrow, the softening of a shoulder, the speed of your breath, because every small move matters. Every one is a signal. But what happens when a signal becomes sound? When something invisible becomes so powerful, it makes you feel, not think. What happens when it's not a gesture, but a song? And that's where it begins, when music pulls your heart. Your heart doesn't break when you hear the notes. It remembers. There's a song you haven't heard in years, maybe decades. It floats in on the radio from a passing car or the background of a random video, and suddenly your chest tightens. Your mind doesn't think, it reacts. You're pulled backward through time, into a memory, a version of yourself long buried under layers of routines and distractions. No one taught you to react this way. You didn't choose to. And yet, there it is. Your throat catches, your skin tingles, your heart stumbles over the beat. A melody becomes a map to your forgotten self. Because music doesn't speak to your mind, it bypasses it. It goes straight to the part of you that still feels everything all at once. But how? The answer lies in how your brain codes experience. Unlike language, which is processed in a specific part of your brain, music recruits nearly every region: memory, emotion, motor control, even vision. It creates a full-body experience. Your brain doesn't just listen to music, it relives the emotional context it first heard it in. That's why the song that played during your first heartbreak can still reduce you to silence years later. It's not nostalgia, it's reactivation. When you first heard that song, your brain linked its rhythm, tone, and progression to everything around it: the place, the people, the pain. Now, when the notes return, so does the emotional environment. The memory doesn't return like a picture. It returns like a feeling. And this isn't just emotional memory, it's chemical. Music triggers the release of dopamine, the same reward chemical that responds to food, sex, and drugs. But unlike other pleasures, music doesn't need a tangible source. The notes themselves are enough. A single chord progression can flood your system with reward, even if the song makes you cry. That's the paradox. Pain wrapped in beauty. Sad music makes us feel alive. Not because we enjoy suffering, but because it reminds us that we can still feel deeply. In a world that flattens emotion, sterilizes experience, and encourages numbness, music becomes rebellion. It dares you to hurt, and in doing so, it heals. But it's not just about memory or emotion. Music also manipulates time. A single crescendo can stretch seconds into eternity. A haunting refrain can trap you in a loop. Songs distort your perception, pulling you out of linear awareness into something more fluid, more immersive. They create emotional timelines, layered and circular, where moments repeat and evolve without ever truly ending. And here's where the control begins. Because if music can bypass logic and hijack emotion, what else can it do? Think of national anthems, religious hymns, military marches. These aren't just sounds, they're programming. They embed identity, loyalty, and belief deep into your nervous system. Long before you understand the words, you feel the meaning. Music becomes ideology with a rhythm. It teaches you how to feel about your country, your God, your tribe. But it doesn't stop there. Advertising agencies spend billions finding the perfect hook, the 4-second jingle that drills itself into your subconscious, shaping your purchasing habits before you're even aware. Political rallies use swelling orchestras to make shallow promises feel profound. Even social media trends rely on musical loops to addict you, conditioning your mood and behavior through repetition and rhythm. Because, here's the dark truth, when your emotions can be triggered without your awareness, they can be weaponized. But not all control is malicious. Sometimes you use music to manipulate yourself. Think about your playlists, the sad songs you play on loop when you're spiraling, the angry music you blast when you need a fire lit under you, the calming tunes you play to survive the commute. You're not listening to music. You're dosing yourself, using sound as medicine, as armor, as camouflage. You control the track list, but the emotions, they still control you, and sometimes they betray you. A song plays and suddenly you're crying in traffic or smiling at a memory you swore you buried. That's the thing about music. It's honest even when you're not. It exposes you. It forces your subconscious to the surface. It won't let you lie, not for long, because in a world of distraction and noise, music still finds you. It still touches the part of you that hasn't given up, the part that still believes in beauty, still hopes, still hurts, and that's why it pulls your heart, not with logic, not with words, but with the invisible thread that binds you to your most human self. So the next time a song stops you in your tracks, don't just ask what it reminds you of. Ask what part of you it's trying to wake up. Because some truths can't be spoken. They have to be sung. And if music can make you believe a feeling is real, what happens when a story does the same? What makes a story feel true, even when it's completely made up? It's not the facts. It's not the evidence. It's not even the logic. It's something much older, deeper, primitive. The truth of a story isn't measured by how real it is, but by how real it feels. And that feeling, that's the trap. Your brain evolved to make sense of chaos by finding patterns. A sound in the woods became a predator. A flash of light in the sky became a god. These weren't facts, they were stories. Narratives that stitched random events into a framework you could survive in. That instinct never left. You still reach for meaning, still crave coherence, still need the illusion of order. And that's where stories win. Stories are seductive because they offer what life doesn't: resolution. Real life is messy, uncertain, fragmented. But a good story, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It wraps confusion in clarity. It makes sense of senselessness. It tells you why something happened and what it means. And once that meaning is offered, your brain latches on, tight. You trust stories that mirror your emotions. Sadness, triumph, betrayal. When a story aligns with how you feel, it bypasses your skepticism. You're not evaluating it anymore. You're reliving it. That's why even fiction can feel truer than reality, because it hits the emotional notes that your own life skips over. But there's more. A story doesn't just make you feel, it makes you feel right. It validates your experience, your worldview, your identity. It confirms what you already believe, or what you desperately want to believe. It becomes a mirror, not a window, and the more closely it reflects your internal world, the more convinced you are that it's real. This is how propaganda works. This is how cults form. This is how conspiracy theories gain traction. Not through evidence, but through emotional resonance. Through stories so powerful, so affirming, so emotionally satisfying, that they become immune to contradiction. You don't just believe them, you become them. Your mind is wired to prefer simplicity over complexity, certainty over doubt. So when a story offers a clear villain, a noble hero, a neat resolution, you cling to it. Even if the world is far more complicated, even if the truth is uncertain and uncomfortable, you'd rather feel safe in a lie than lost in the truth. And here's the darkest part. You don't even notice it happening. You think you're rational. You think you're objective. But your brain is just filling in the blanks, writing its own narrative, making reality fit the story it already decided to believe. That's why two people can watch the same event and come away with entirely different interpretations. They're not seeing the event, they're seeing the story they already believe, projected onto it. They don't argue facts, they argue narratives. And facts never win against a story that feels emotionally true. Think of how memory works. You don't remember what happened. You remember the story you told yourself about what happened. That story changes over time, shaped by emotion, bias, repetition. And the more you repeat it, the truer it feels. Not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. Truth becomes repetition. Repetition becomes belief. Belief becomes identity. And once a story becomes who you are, questioning it feels like questioning your own existence. This is why people defend their belief so fiercely. They're not defending facts, they're defending the stories that hold their world together. To lose the story would be to fall into chaos, and your mind will do anything to avoid that. So why does a story feel true? Because it gives you what you need: structure, certainty, emotion, identity. It replaces confusion with clarity. It turns randomness into destiny. It whispers that your life has meaning, that your suffering matters, that you're part of something bigger. It seduces you with coherence. And in a world that often feels meaningless, that seduction is nearly impossible to resist. But the next time a story feels true, stop. Ask yourself, does it feel true because it's real, or because it's comforting, because it challenges you, or because it flatters you, because it expands your perspective, or just reinforces your biases? Because the most dangerous story isn't the one you hear, it's the one you never question. And that story, the one you've told yourself 1,000 times, may be the very reason you can't escape the habit you've never been able to break. You wake up every morning and swear you'll stop. Maybe today you think will be the day it ends. The last time you check your phone in bed. The last time you pretend you're okay with a job you hate. The last time you scroll, consume, conform. But by nightfall, nothing changes. The pattern continues. The habit remains. And you start to wonder, what if this isn't just a habit? What if it's a system? There's a cruel genius in how some habits are formed. They don't announce themselves as destructive. They don't come wearing warning labels. They arrive wrapped in convenience, dopamine, and the illusion of control. Harmless at first, then essential, then invisible. Like air, like gravity. You don't question them because they're part of you now. It starts with a click, a scroll, a thought you suppress instead of confront. Each time you surrender, you reinforce the pattern. Your brain logs the experience, rewards it, builds a pathway deeper and deeper into the forest of your own conditioning. Eventually, that forest becomes home, and the path back out, buried. But this isn't just psychological, it's infrastructural. The systems you live in are built to reward repetition. Schools condition you to follow schedules. Work trains you to suppress discomfort. Media teaches you what to desire, what to fear, what to ignore. Every part of your environment is designed to reinforce specific behaviors, most of which serve someone else's interests more than your own. Take procrastination. It's not laziness, it's avoidance. And avoidance is a learned response. You avoid the hard tasks because you've been trained to associate effort with punishment, not purpose. You delay meaningful work because deep down you suspect it won't be valued anyway. So you numb yourself with short-term pleasure, scrolling, snacking, escaping, until you forget what mattered in the first place. Or take validation. You seek it not because you're vain, but because the world taught you to equate approval with safety. From childhood, praise was your currency. And now, every like, every comment, every nod of agreement feels like oxygen. You know it's shallow, but you keep returning. Because the withdrawal symptoms of stopping are worse than the addiction itself. Even self-doubt becomes a ritual. You doubt your abilities, your instincts, your worth, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. The voice in your head that whispers you're not good enough didn't come from nowhere. It was planted, repeated, cemented, and now it feels like your own, when it was never yours to begin with. What makes these habits unbreakable isn't just repetition, it's reinforcement. Every habit that controls you is tied to a reward, comfort, distraction, illusion. And every time you try to break free, the system retaliates. You feel anxious, irritable, off balance. Not because you're failing, but because you're rewiring something that was designed to stay broken. It's not willpower that fails you. It's the architecture of your life. You can't build a new habit on a foundation that's still rotting from the last one. You can't escape a pattern if every escape route is rigged with landmines of guilt, shame, and societal expectation. But here's the brutal truth. The habit isn't just the thing you do, it's who you think you are. Your identity gets entangled with the pattern. You say, "I'm just that kind of person." You laugh it off, you accept the narrative. And with every repetition, the story gets stronger, until changing the habit doesn't just feel hard, it feels like death, because part of you will die. The part that's addicted to comfort, the part that's afraid of uncertainty, the part that clings to the familiar, even when it hurts. That version of you will resist with everything it has. It will scream, it will bargain, it will beg you to stay the same. But beyond that, resistance is freedom, not the Instagram version, not the self-help cliché. Real freedom, the terrifying, exhilarating, responsibility-laden kind. The kind that doesn't feel like success at first, but silence, emptiness, space, and only then the possibility of something new. Because the habit you can't break isn't just a behavior, it's a prison. And every time you give in, you tighten the chains. But every time you resist, truly resist, you loosen them, inch by inch, thought by thought, until one day the habit isn't you anymore. And then something else emerges, something dangerous, something powerful. Because when the habit breaks, they can no longer predict you. But what happens when you finally start acting like someone's watching? Let's talk about that. What if every room you walked into whispered your name behind closed smiles? Every hallway, every pause in conversation, every flickering glance, a possible performance staged for your approval or your punishment. You might tell yourself it's paranoia. But what if it isn't? What if the performance is real, and you're the unwilling star? When everyone is watching you, something strange starts to happen. You become less of a person and more of a projection. You adjust your posture, your tone, your opinions. Not because you want to, but because you're being seen, judged, evaluated. Not just by strangers, but by people you love, people you fear, people you barely know. It starts small. Maybe you post a photo and second-guess your smile. Maybe you laugh differently when others are around. You begin tailoring your identity, shaving off the parts that don't play well in the spotlight. Eventually, you're not sure if you're being yourself or playing the version of you they've come to expect. This is the first layer of the trap: voluntary performance. You do it because it feels safer than being authentic. Because being authentic means risking rejection, ridicule, or silence. And the fear of silence, it's deafening, because in a world where everyone is watching, being ignored feels like death. But there's a second layer, darker and harder to shake. Once you realize you're always being watched, you stop acting for others and start watching yourself. Constantly, mercilessly. You become your own warden, your own censor. Every move, every word filtered through an internal surveillance system, designed not to protect you, but to make you palatable. You become both prisoner and guard, locked in a cell made of mirrors. This internalized gaze is more brutal than any audience. It doesn't applaud. It only measures. It keeps a running tally of how likable, how clever, how attractive, how relevant you are. It reminds you that one misstep, one crack in the facade, and the illusion will shatter. And when the illusion shatters, you fear what's left behind might be nothing. That's the terrifying part. The longer you perform, the more hollow you feel. Not because you're fake, but because the performance becomes so consuming, so reflexive, that you forget where it ends and where you begin. Your identity erodes under the weight of constant observation. Your real thoughts, your strange ideas, your private moments, they shrink, replaced by curated versions meant to survive the spotlight. And the more you perform, the more performance is expected. People start reacting not to who you are, but who you've pretended to be. You want to scream, to show them the truth. But by then, even you aren't sure what that is anymore. And you lose yourself, piece by piece, to the gaze. And it doesn't stop at social interaction. The surveillance culture bleeds into your work, your creativity, your rest. You write what will get likes. You wear what will get compliments. You dream of futures that others will admire, not ones that will actually fulfill you. You seek validation over peace, applause over silence. Because when everyone is watching, silence feels like failure. But here's the catch. The watchers aren't real, not really. Most people are too caught up in their own performances to notice yours. The audience you fear is often imagined, constructed from fragments of judgment you collected over time and gave far too much power. The real enemy isn't the watching, it's your belief that you must always be watchable. Freedom begins the moment you stop needing to be understood. That's the only way out. To break the mirror, to let the mask slip, to risk awkwardness, embarrassment, even rejection. Because authenticity is not about being liked, it's about being whole. You may lose followers, you may lose fans, but what you'll find, if you're lucky, is that the people who stay are not watching you, they're seeing you. And being seen is something entirely different. You are not a product. You are not a performance. You are not here to entertain a crowd that might not even exist. You're here to live, fully, messily, quietly, sometimes, loudly when you need to be, but truly. So the next time you feel the invisible eyes, the tightening in your chest, the urge to correct yourself, pause. Ask who you're performing for. Ask who's benefiting. And ask who you'd be without the spotlight. Because the moment you stop performing is the moment you start becoming. And what happens when the price of being seen starts to shape your value? You walk into a store and see a shirt labeled $75. You glance at another identical fabric, similar design, but it's only $20. Instinctively, you assume the pricier one is better. Why? Because price doesn't just tell you the cost of something. It tells you how much it's supposed to be worth. And slowly, without realizing it, you start believing that higher price equals higher value. But what if the same principle is applied to people? What if a number, your salary, your hourly rate, the price of your service becomes a proxy for your worth? Not just to others, but to yourself. You get paid $15 an hour, and somewhere deep in your subconscious, that becomes your valuation. It doesn't matter if you're intelligent, kind, or hard-working. The market decided. You're worth 15. Someone else makes 200 an hour, and you assume they're smarter, more valuable, more important. It's not a rational decision. It's a conditioned belief. You start thinking like a product. Because in a world obsessed with economics, everything has a price, including you. Your time is for sale. Your energy is for rent. Even your image, your identity, can be monetized online. You become a brand, a commodity, something to be packaged, marketed, and optimized. And in that process, your sense of intrinsic worth slowly erodes. You start to feel like your value is external, dictated by what others are willing to pay, rather than internal, grounded in who you are. This illusion runs deep. You take a job that pays more, even if you hate it, because the higher salary feels like proof that you matter more. You chase promotions, not just for financial stability, but for psychological validation. Your income becomes your scoreboard. The number in your bank account starts to feel like a measure of your success, your competence, your dignity. But here's the trap. Once you accept that price defines worth, you've already lost. Because price is not determined by value. It's determined by power, scarcity, manipulation, and perception. The most underpaid roles, teachers, caregivers, social workers, often require immense intelligence, empathy, and emotional labor. Yet they're paid the least, not because they're less valuable, but because they're less profitable. And still, we believe the lie, because that lie is everywhere. You see it in dating, in hiring, in healthcare. The assumption that someone with more money must be more capable, more deserving, more respectable. It's why people listen more closely to someone in a suit. Why confidence is confused with competence. Why wealth gets mistaken for wisdom. Price bleeds into every social interaction, reshaping your judgments without you even noticing. But there's another layer. What happens when you try to raise your price? You ask for more, a higher wage, better pay, increased compensation. Suddenly, you're told you're greedy, difficult, not worth it. The system teaches you to internalize your own discount, to believe that asking for more is selfish, that settling for less is noble. You're rewarded for staying cheap, punished for demanding what you're worth. So over time, you stop asking, you stop challenging, you accept the valuation. And just like that, your perceived price becomes a prison. But here's the most insidious part. This isn't just about how others see you, it's about how you see yourself. The longer you're told your time is only worth a certain amount, the more you believe it. You stop pursuing opportunities that feel out of your league. You don't apply for jobs with bigger salaries because you assume you're not qualified. You shrink your own sense of possibility to fit the number on your paycheck. And eventually, you start making decisions not based on what fulfills you, but on what you think you're allowed to want. You price your dreams. You discount your desires. You become a bargain version of yourself. But ask yourself this: who set that price? Who told you what you were worth? And what if they were wrong? What if your real worth has nothing to do with price, nothing to do with market salaries or societal labels? What if your value is unquantifiable, messy, expansive, immeasurable? The truth is, there's no price tag for compassion, no hourly rate for integrity, no invoice for resilience. The things that make you most valuable are the very things that the market can't measure. So be careful, because once you let the world set your price, you stop being a person. You become a product. And products don't get to decide their worth. They get labeled, shelved, and sold. But people can choose. They can reject the label, refuse the valuation, demand more, not just in money, but in meaning. Because your worth is not a number, it's a force. And the moment you reclaim it, you're no longer for sale. And if price can shape your worth, what happens when something that costs nothing speaks louder than everything else? You don't always need to be shouted at to be controlled. Sometimes the most commanding voices are the ones that never speak at all. Think about the times you've walked into a room and felt something shift, not because anyone said anything, but because something wasn't said. A silence so heavy, it pressed against your chest. A silence that made your skin crawl. That's not absence. That's presence, and it's speaking volumes. Silence is rarely neutral. In fact, it's often strategic. Sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's power. But most dangerously, silence can be compliance dressed as innocence. When someone refuses to speak, they're not always avoiding conflict, they're shaping the outcome, withholding information, withholding response, withholding validation. Silence isn't passive, it's calculated. Consider the silence of institutions when injustice occurs. A child is abused, a community is devastated, a person cries out for help, and the people in power, silent, not because they don't hear, but because silence lets the machine keep running. It avoids accountability. It allows plausible deniability. It keeps the image clean while the rot spreads underneath. The silence doesn't mean ignorance. It means consent. On a personal level, silence is even more sinister. The silent treatment isn't just childish, it's psychological warfare. It punishes without confrontation, wounds without words. It places the burden entirely on the other person, to guess, to doubt themselves, to spiral, and that's the point. Silence manipulates. It confuses, it destabilizes. But sometimes silence is used to maintain illusions, to avoid the unbearable truths about our own lives. You don't ask your partner the question you dread the answer to. You don't call out the family member who keeps crossing boundaries. You stay quiet at work, even though your soul is screaming, and you tell yourself it's to keep the peace. But that's silence, that's self-betrayal, and over time it hollows you out. Because every time you stay silent in the face of what matters, you make a choice. You prioritize comfort over truth, safety over growth, acceptance over authenticity. And in doing so, you reinforce the very systems, personal, social, political, that rely on silence to survive. Even your own mind isn't immune. The thoughts you avoid, the memories you bury, the emotions you suppress, they don't disappear. They wait in the quiet moments, in the pauses between distractions, and they speak in the language of anxiety, of guilt, of shame. You think you've silenced them, but really, you've just let them fester. Silence is also weaponized in relationships. The abusive partner who never yells, never hits, but just withdraws, disappears emotionally, leaves you starving for connection. Their silence says, you're not worth the energy. Their silence says, I control when you feel safe, when you feel seen. You won't find their cruelty in words. You'll find it in what they don't say. And then there's the silence of the crowd. The co-workers who know what's happening, but say nothing. The neighbors who hear the screaming next door, but turn up the TV. The friends who disappear when things get hard. This isn't harmless. This is how damage multiplies. This is how trauma spreads. Silence doesn't just allow harm, it protects it. But perhaps the most dangerous silence is your own. The silence you use to avoid rocking the boat. The silence you use to stay liked, to stay safe, to stay invisible. You convince yourself it's strength. That restraint is maturity. But silence can be cowardice. It can be complicity. It can be the very thing keeping you small. Because when you stay silent too long, you lose your voice. And when you lose your voice, you lose yourself. You were taught to believe silence is golden. But silence, when it should be broken, is a cage. And every second you spend inside it, the walls close in, until the day you realize you're not keeping the peace. You're just keeping yourself imprisoned. So ask yourself, what is your silence protecting? And who is it benefiting? Because silence always serves someone. And sometimes it's not you. But what if the thing shaping your next decision isn't silence at all, but a face? A face so familiar, so powerful, that it hijacks your logic without you even realizing it. You see a face, not a name, not a resume, not a number, just a face. And yet it changes everything. You're asked to make a decision. Maybe it's hiring someone, choosing a leader, picking a jury, or even deciding who gets saved first. There's data in front of you, objective, rational, well organized. But then a photo slides across the table, a face, and suddenly the facts blur. Something shifts. You start to feel instead of think. It might be a warm smile, eyes that remind you of someone, a jawline that signals strength or submission. Whatever it is, your brain starts whispering stories. Stories you don't realize you're writing. Stories that feel like instinct, but are really influence. That face becomes a character in your mind's theater. Hero, villain, victim, ally. This isn't intuition. It's something deeper, something older. Your brain is ancient machinery, and one of its core functions is facial recognition, not just in the sense of identifying someone, but in decoding meaning, safety, threat, beauty, weakness, power. All of it is assessed in milliseconds, long before you're even aware a judgment has taken place. You think you're objective. You think you make decisions based on logic, but more often than not, you're reacting to a face. This is known as the halo effect. One positive impression, often based on appearance, bleeds into how we assess everything else about someone. A symmetrical face. They must be smart. Soft eyes, probably kind. Sharp features, must be competent. The illusion is complete, and we rarely even notice. But the danger isn't just in what you assume, it's in how much you trust those assumptions. You don't realize how powerful this is until you see two mugshots side by side. You're told to guess which person committed the violent crime. You don't know either of them. But one face looks colder, one looks softer. You choose, and you're likely wrong. Studies show we are astonishingly bad at identifying guilt, competence, or character from a face. But that doesn't stop us from trying. This isn't just a quirk of human psychology. It's a system of control. Because the people who know this, advertisers, politicians, casting directors, weaponize it. They understand that if they can put the right face in front of you, they can guide your choices without force, without reason, without you even noticing. Why do you trust one leader over another? Why does one person's argument sound more convincing, even when they say the same thing? Why do jurors give lighter sentences to attractive defendants? Because a face, not a fact, is pulling the strings. Even children aren't immune. From a young age, we're conditioned to associate certain facial features with trustworthiness. Cartoons exaggerate this: big eyes for innocence, angular faces for menace. Over time, these symbols become unconscious truths. We stop questioning them, we just feel them. And this bias isn't distributed evenly. Racial features, gender expressions, age lines. All of these are interpreted differently, and often unfairly. A face that looks angry might just be tired. A face that looks untrustworthy might just be unfamiliar. But your brain doesn't ask questions, it reacts. And those reactions shape real decisions, real consequences. A hiring manager skips over a resume because the photo didn't feel right. A teacher unconsciously favors a student with a pleasant face. A police officer reacts with more aggression because of how someone looks under stress. None of this is deliberate, but all of it is dangerous. You don't see the bias because it hides inside what feels like truth. You call it instinct, you call it a gut feeling, but it's programming, subtle, ancient, and easily manipulated. So what do? You start by noticing when a face triggers a reaction in you. Pause, ask yourself, am I seeing this person or just projecting? Am I responding to their words or to the emotional blueprint their face has stamped into my brain? You won't catch it every time, but each time you do, you reclaim a little of your autonomy. You loosen the grip that unseen forces have on your decisions. You remind yourself that a face is not a fact, because if you trust your instincts without interrogation, you'll keep choosing the familiar, the comfortable, the biased. And those who understand the game will keep winning, not because they deserve to, but because their face is the one you were told to follow. But what happens when the influence comes from something you can't see at all? Stay with me, because next comes the unsettling reason why a secret moves you. You've likely felt it before, a subtle shift in the air, a tightening in your chest, an inexplicable pull towards something unsaid. It's not a sound or a sight, but a presence, a secret, hovering in a room, whispering just beneath the surface. And you're drawn to it, even when you don't want to be, especially then. But why? Why does a secret, something hidden, something deliberately withheld, move you so deeply? Because secrets break the rules of reality. They bend the structure you've come to rely on. When someone says, "I have something to tell you," your brain shifts into high alert. Time slows, your senses heighten, everything else fades. That single sentence opens a door to the unknown, a place where anything might be true. Secrets demand attention. They hijack your emotional bandwidth, override your mental filters, and insert themselves into your thoughts like splinters. And that's because they represent danger and possibility in equal measure. A secret could destroy what you believe, or it could liberate you from what you've been forced to accept. Either way, it changes things. But it's deeper than that. A secret is a contradiction. It says what you see isn't all there is. It reminds you that reality is layered, and you're only ever looking at the top. That's both terrifying and exhilarating. Terrifying, because it means you might be wrong about everything, about someone you trust, about who you are. But exhilarating, because it whispers that more is possible. That hidden knowledge might set you free. This is why children instinctively love secrets. Why we gossip, why we're drawn to diaries, confessions, locked doors, and restricted files. Because a secret is proof that the world still has depth, that it still holds mystery. That not everything has been flattened into explanation or routine. And in a world screaming for transparency, secrets are the last sacred spaces of mystery. But there's a darker truth behind why secrets move you. It's not just about curiosity, it's about control. A secret means someone knows something you don't. Someone has power. Someone holds the thread that could unravel you, or your beliefs, or your safety. That imbalance disturbs you on a primal level, because when you don't know what someone else knows, you can't predict their actions. You can't defend yourself. You're vulnerable, and we hate feeling vulnerable. That's why betrayal hurts so deeply. It's not just the lie, it's that someone else had a truth and you didn't. They moved through the world, armed with information you lacked. They were playing a different game, with different rules, while you thought everything was normal. That's not just deception, that's domination. But here's the paradox. While secrets make us feel powerless, we also crave them. We want to know, we need to know, because we believe falsely that once we know the truth, we'll be safe. But secrets don't offer safety. They offer obsession. Think about the secret you've kept the longest, the one you've buried so deep, it almost doesn't feel real anymore. Why haven't you told it? Because it protects you, or because it defines you in a way you can't bear to face. Some secrets are so tightly woven into our identities that revealing them would feel like setting fire to everything we are. And here's what's worse. Most of your life is already built around secrets you don't even realize you're keeping. You downplay your fears. You hide your jealousy. You cover up the resentment you feel toward those you love most. These are emotional secrets, concealed not just from others, but from yourself, because the truth would make things messy, complicated, painful, and so you keep them tucked away, quiet but alive, shaping your decisions from the shadows. But secrets don't die in silence. They metastasize. They grow into anxiety, compulsions, nightmares. Your mind doesn't forget. It just rebrands the truth as discomfort. And every time you avoid facing it, the secret tightens its grip. Still, you keep it, because letting it out feels more dangerous than holding it in. But what if the reverse is true? What if the secret is the weight that's breaking you? What if the moment you speak it, your whole body finally exhales? What if the act of hiding is what keeps the pain alive? Because some secrets don't just hold you, they become you. And the longer you keep them, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before. So maybe that's why a secret moves you, not just because it's hidden, but because it reveals that the most powerful things in life aren't the ones we show. They're the ones we bury. And in that buried silence lies the real architecture of our identity, fragile, complex, and dangerously alive. Because once you uncover one secret, you start to question everything else. And that brings us to a far more disturbing thought. What if the only thing stopping you from seeing the truth is the comfort of not looking? What happens when those hidden forces are inside you? What if the only thing more dangerous than a secret are the limits you don't see? What if the strongest limits aren't the ones you crash into, but the ones you never see? Most cages don't come with bars. Most leashes aren't tied to poles. They're woven into language, layered into culture, reinforced through every choice you didn't realize was never really yours. You move through the world like a free person. You decide what to wear, where to go, what to say. But underneath that freedom is a script you didn't write, a framework you didn't question, a limit you didn't notice. It starts early. As a child, you're praised for being well-behaved, for staying in line, for not asking too many questions. Obedience is mistaken for virtue. You're handed rules and expected to follow them, told they're for your own good. But did you ever ask who wrote those rules, or why they never seem to apply to everyone equally? By the time you're old enough to question the world has already answered for you. It hands you a map, school, work, family, retirement, and says, "This is life." And you believe it because everyone else seems to. The map feels real. But you never stop to ask what's outside the borders. Most people never do, because the moment you start questioning the map, you start feeling lost. You lose the comfort of certainty. You lose the illusion of control. So you stay inside the lines, not because they make sense, but because stepping out feels like falling. But what if the lines themselves are the illusion? Every belief you hold is a lens, not a mirror. It shapes what you see, filters what you understand, and hides everything that doesn't fit. You believe in fairness, so you explain away injustice. You believe in hard work, so you ignore how the game is rigged. These beliefs aren't evil, they're not lies, but they are limits. Limits on what you're allowed to imagine, on what you think is possible, on who you think you are. Even your identity becomes a form of containment. You say, I'm shy. I'm not creative. I'm just not that kind of person. But who told you that? Was it a parent, a teacher, a bully, or was it just a moment? One rejection, one embarrassment that you replayed until it hardened into identity. You didn't choose these limits, but you obey them all the same, because limits offer safety, predictability, identity. They keep the chaos at bay. But the cost is steep. A smaller life. A life where the walls are invisible but absolute. A life where discomfort is the only signal that something real is happening, and you've been trained to avoid it. The scariest part, the limits that matter most, are the ones you defend. You argue for your fears. You justify your insecurities. You wear your wounds like armor, not realizing they're keeping you from ever feeling truly free. You say, "This is just how I am." But what if it's not? What if that's just how you've been told you are? The system doesn't need to imprison you if it can convince you to stay put on your own. That's the genius of invisible limits. They feel like truth. They feel like identity, but they're just repetition. Conditioned thoughts echoing through your mind until they drown out anything new. To see the limit is to break it. To question the rule is to reclaim the game. Then the moment you stop asking, "What am I allowed to do?" and start asking, "What do I want to become?" you begin to step outside the cage. Not everyone will follow you. Most people cling to the comfort of their constraints. But if you want to live freely, truly freely, you must be willing to tear down the walls you didn't know were there. Because the most dangerous limits aren't enforced from the outside, they're whispered inside your own head. And the moment you see that, you realize you were never trapped, just trained. But what happens when the training no longer works? What happens when even your label stops fitting and starts feeling like a muzzle? They call it identity, but it works more like a leash. The moment someone assigns you a label, student, employee, parent, introvert, failure, genius, victim, it doesn't just describe you. It directs you. Quietly, invisibly. It tells you how to act, how to think, and most importantly, what not to question. Labels create scripts, and scripts kill agency. Imagine being handed a role in a play, one you never auditioned for. Suddenly, everything you do is filtered through that role. If you're labeled smart, you're expected to always know the answer. If you're difficult, your resistance is framed as a flaw. If you're traumatized, your emotions are pathologized. If you're resilient, your pain is overlooked. It doesn't matter whether the label is flattering or damning. Either way, it boxes you in. You start to conform, not because you want to, but because people expect it. You begin to fear contradicting your own label. You start acting in alignment with what you're called, not who you are. That's the trap. The scariest part. You rarely notice it happening. Labels feel like truth. They feel earned. But most of the time, they're guesses, snap judgments made by people who don't live your life. A teacher calls you lazy, and suddenly you stop trying. A boss calls you reliable, and now you can't say no. The label becomes a cage you decorate like a home. And then comes the internalization. You adopt the label, repeat it in your head. Use it to justify your limits. I'm just not a people person. I've always been anxious. It's just who I am. But is it? Or is it who you were told you are? Over and over, until it hardened into identity. Labels do something even more dangerous. They simplify you. They strip you down to one dimension, erasing the contradictions and complexities that make you human. They don't capture your potential. They cap it. Because if you're already defined, why explore? Social systems love labels. They streamline control. A labeled person is a predictable person. You're easier to market, to manage, dismiss. The system doesn't need you to be free. It needs you to be legible. This is why institutions sought us early. Schools, tests, resumes, diagnoses, they all carve us into categories. Gifted, average, at risk. These aren't neutral descriptors, they're destinies in disguise. Once sorted, you're nudged along a track. Stepping off it feels like betrayal of expectations, of identity, of self. Even rebellion gets labeled. You're an activist, an outsider, a troublemaker. And just like that, your dissent becomes digestible. The label absorbs the threat. But here's the paradox. We crave labels too. They give us belonging, a narrative, a way to make sense of ourselves. Without them, we feel unmoored. Who am I if I'm not my role? If I'm not my trauma, my profession, my pain? Yet true freedom only begins when you stop mistaking the label for the person. When you realize that who you are today doesn't have to define who you'll be tomorrow. That you're not a role, you're a process, a contradiction, a story still being written. Let this sink in. The labels that once made you feel seen can become the very thing that blinds you. The only way to reclaim your agency is to step outside the role. Refuse the script. Be willing to be misunderstood. Because the label might keep you safe, but it will never make you free. And what if the next label you accept doesn't define you, but warns you? You meet a stranger across a small table. 2 drinks, 2 menus, 2 people trying to present the best version of themselves. It feels harmless, a date. It's something in the atmosphere vibrates with quiet tension, like something's not quite right. But you can't name it. You smile, you talk, you listen. And all the while, something in the back of your mind keeps whispering, this feels familiar, not in a comforting way, but like déjà vu before disaster. Because a date isn't just small talk and wine, it's an audition, a test, a mirror. You're not just learning who they are, you're learning what parts of yourself you're willing to sell, conceal, or abandon just to be liked. Every moment becomes a negotiation between your truth and your desire to be accepted. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You pretend to agree with things that make you uneasy. And you tell yourself you're just being polite. But are you? A date is where your subconscious walks onto the stage. It's the quiet inventory of your insecurities. What you wear, how you sit, the way you answer, not honestly, but strategically. Because dating isn't about truth, it's about presentation, and presentation is performance. You don't show them who you are, you show them who you hope they'll want. And that's the warning. It's in the way you feel before you meet, scrutinizing yourself in the mirror, asking if you're enough. It's in the way you talk yourself down in the bathroom, rehearsing lines, anticipating judgment. It's in the way you measure your own worth through someone else's reactions. A raised eyebrow, a missed laugh, a pause too long. Each tiny signal becomes a verdict on your identity. What's terrifying isn't the possibility of rejection. It's the fact that you've already started rejecting yourself before the other person has even spoken. A date is where you learn what you're willing to compromise. It's the birthplace of tiny lies. You say you're okay splitting the bill when you're not. You say you love jazz when you've never listened to it. You say you're chill, laid back, drama-free, as if the absence of needs is a virtue. But the lie isn't in what you say, it's in what you omit. You don't say how much you fear abandonment. You don't say that your last relationship hollowed you out. You don't say that you're still haunted by things you pretend not to remember. You don't say these things because no one wants to be the person who bleeds too early. And so, you smile and sip and stitch yourself tighter. The real danger of a date is that you're taught to silence the parts of yourself that need to speak the loudest. Vulnerability becomes currency. Honesty becomes risk. And slowly, without realizing, you teach yourself that being desirable is more important than being real. And what's even more unsettling, the person across from you is likely doing the exact same thing. Two people, two masks, both silently begging to be seen, while desperately hiding the parts they're most afraid to show. It's a strange, beautiful tragedy, this ritual of mutual misrepresentation. It's not deception for cruelty's sake. It's survival. The need to belong is that primal, that desperate, that dangerous, because the goal isn't connection. It's approval, and approval comes at a price. Maybe you stop saying what you really think. Maybe you shrink your opinions. Maybe you pretend you're less complicated, less emotional, less intense than you actually are. Not because you're dishonest, but because you're terrified of being too much. But here's the catch. If they like the version of you that isn't real, then every compliment, every touch, every kiss, they don't land on you. They land on your disguise. And the more you keep that mask on, the harder it becomes to take it off. Eventually, you don't even know if you're faking it anymore. So what begins as a date becomes something darker, a rehearsal for lifelong performance, a training ground for self-erasure, a blueprint for how to disappear inside a smile. And every time it happens, the lesson sinks deeper. Be likable, be agreeable, be wanted. But don't be yourself. That's too risky. And so what should be a moment of discovery becomes a warning flare. A message your gut sends straight to your bones. Be careful. This is where it starts. This is where you lose yourself. One compliment, one compromise, one curated laugh at a time. But now, imagine the opposite. Imagine you sit across from someone and say what you really feel. Imagine not performing. Imagine being seen and accepted. No mask, no strategy, just truth. It's rare, but it's real. And once you experience it, you never forget it. Because it doesn't just feel like love. It feels like waking up. And now ask yourself, when was the last time a date felt like that? Now ask, when was the last time it didn't? And what if the next person you meet isn't another mask, but a mirror? Because what's coming next might shatter everything you think you know about chance, certainty, and the lies hiding in plain statistics. You believe you're good at guessing. Odds, you think you can sense risk. You trust your gut. But here's the problem. Your gut lies. It doesn't whisper probabilities, it screams stories, and those stories feel like truth because they're yours. Familiar, intuitive, wrong. You're walking down the street. You hear about a plane crash. Suddenly, flying feels dangerous. You forget the tens of thousands of safe flights happening every single day. Why? Because your brain wasn't built for math. It was built for survival. And survival doesn't rely on statistics. It relies on emotion, vivid images, not cold numbers. This is the availability heuristic. The mind's dirty trick of equating what's easy to recall with what's most likely to happen. Plane crashes, shark attacks, lightning strikes, rare, terrifying, unforgettable. And because they're unforgettable, they feel frequent. But they're not even close. Meanwhile, the real dangers, heart disease, car accidents, chronic stress, slip by unnoticed. Boring, familiar, deadly. But you don't see that. You trust your instincts. You think you're seeing clearly. You're not. Take gambling. A slot machine lights up. You feel it's due for a win. You sense a pattern. There is none. The machine has no memory. But your brain is addicted to patterns, to narratives. It wants to believe there's meaning in the noise. So you keep pulling, keep betting. convinced your luck is about to turn. This is the gambler's fallacy, the illusion that randomness has a conscience, that the universe is keeping score. It isn't. There's no balance to restore. Just chaos, cold, uncaring randomness. And it gets worse when stakes rise. Imagine a job interview. You think back to the last one you nailed. You wore blue, so you wear blue again. You had coffee, so you repeat every step. Rituals, superstitions, tiny gods of your own creation. Because odds feel less terrifying when you think you have control. Even if it's fake, we build myths around luck to silence our dread of chance. But those myths control us. They don't predict outcomes. They dictate behavior. You start believing in signs, vibes, gut feelings. And slowly, reality bends around your illusions. Now consider politics, society, justice. You think the best argument wins, that truth will rise, that people vote rationally. But they don't. We estimate odds based on emotion, loyalty, identity, not reason, not logic. So you trust polls, forecasts, 5% odds of failure. You breathe easy. But 5% isn't zero. 5% means 1 in 20 times. The improbable happens. And when it does, you call it shocking, unexpected, impossible. But it wasn't. You just misunderstood the odds. You thought low probability meant no probability. Our brains are riddled with these distortions. Optimism bias, where you believe bad things happen to others, not you. Confirmation bias, where you filter out facts that don't fit your story. Survivorship bias, where you only hear from winners, never from those who lost everything quietly. So you read about entrepreneurs who risked everything and succeeded, and you think risk leads to reward. But you never hear from the 99 who risked everything and disappeared. Not because they weren't smart, not because they weren't brave, just because odds are odds, and odds don't care. You make decisions every day under illusions of certainty. You overestimate your control, you underestimate randomness, and worst of all, you refuse to admit it. Because to admit it would mean surrendering the idea that you are the architect of your fate, that your choices lead to predictable outcomes, that life is fair, that skill matters more than chance. But deep down, you know that's not true. You've seen brilliant people fail. You've seen foolish people rise. You've watched chaos win and order lose. So maybe it's time to stop pretending you understand the odds. Maybe it's time to realize that the stories you tell yourself about risk, chance, and probability are comforting lies. Because the real odds, the actual, cold, statistical truth, it's not just uncomfortable, it's terrifying. You think a promise is solid, a guarantee. But what if the promise itself is the trap? A promise can feel like gravity, invisible, constant, and impossibly hard to escape. At first it's just words, simple, spoken, maybe even whispered in the heat of emotion. But once you hear it, once it lands in your mind, it takes root like a hook in your psyche. It changes your trajectory. You start making choices around it. You bend your time, your priorities, your identity to orbit something that may not even exist anymore. What gives a promise that kind of power? It isn't the logic of it. It's not the practicality. It's the implied future. A promise paints a picture you didn't ask for but now feel obligated to chase. It tugs at your sense of loyalty, of continuity, and sometimes even your sense of self-worth gets tangled in it. If you break it, what does that say about you? This is the trap. Because the promise might have been made under completely different conditions, different people, different circumstances. But promises are sticky. They don't adapt easily. They don't evolve, you do. But the promise stays rigid, and the more time passes, the more guilt hardens around it. You start to confuse keeping the promise with keeping your identity intact. It doesn't help that the world romanticizes this kind of commitment. A person is only as good as their word, they say. Breaking a promise isn't just a betrayal of another person, it's a betrayal of who you are. That's the narrative. So you stay, you push forward. You honor the words you said a long time ago, even when everything else has changed. But here's the uncomfortable question. What if the promise was never yours to keep? What if it was extracted from you in a moment of weakness or loneliness or guilt? What if it was a tool, not of love or trust, but of subtle manipulation? Promises are easy to use that way. You wrap control in the language of commitment. You disguise obligation as intimacy. And once someone agrees, they become bound by invisible threads they can't explain or prove, but feel deeply. You might tell yourself you're staying true to your values, but look closer. Sometimes what you're really doing is clinging to an outdated version of yourself, terrified of what it would mean to let go. You fear who you'd be if you allowed yourself to break the promise. Because breaking it might mean admitting that you've changed, that your needs have changed, that your truth has shifted, and that's terrifying. Because we've been taught that growth is noble, but change that challenges your past, that's dangerous, that's shameful. So instead, we keep the promise, we pretend it still fits. We drag its weight behind us like a chain disguised as purpose. There's another layer to this too. When you keep a promise that no longer serves you, it starts to rot, slowly, quietly. It eats away at your joy, your authenticity, your ability to live fully in the present, because part of you is always living in the past, rehearsing an old version of love, loyalty, or identity that no longer exists. And yet, even when you see the damage, you hesitate. You remember the face of the person you made the promise to. You remember their trust, their hope, their belief in your words, and you tell yourself that pain is just part of being good, part of being reliable. That self-sacrifice is what love looks like. But is it, or is it fear? Fear of confrontation, fear of judgment, fear of what others will think when you stop performing the version of yourself they once depended on. There's a kind of moral blackmail in this, a quiet threat. If you change, you've betrayed me. If you walk away, you were never who you said you were. That's what makes promises so dangerous. They're often built on static definitions of dynamic people. They deny the natural evolution of selfhood. They freeze you in time. And maybe that's why some promises feel sacred. Not because they're pure, but because they demand sacrifice. They make you bleed quietly, beautifully, in the name of something higher. But here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud, not all sacrifices are holy. Some are just slow suicides. The moment you realize that, the moment you allow yourself to question the promise, to trace its origin, to examine the weight of it with clarity rather than guilt, you begin to free yourself. Not from your word, but from the illusion that you owe your life to it. You don't. Your evolution doesn't require an apology, and breaking a promise isn't always a betrayal. Sometimes it's the most honest, courageous thing you can do, because honoring your truth might be the only promise that actually matters. And if that unsettles you, if it shakes something deep, it should. Because next, we'll explore the terrifying power of belief, and how even the faintest shade of faith can warp your reality more than any lie ever could. What if what you believe isn't true? Or worse, what if it's only partially true? Not enough to ground you, but just enough to trap you. Every belief you hold feels solid, familiar, like a well-worn path through a forest you've walked 1,000 times. But how often do you question? Who laid that path? Who cleared the way? Who decided where it should lead, or what you're meant to see along the journey? Most of us inherit our beliefs. Family hands them down like heirlooms. Culture reinforces them with repetition. Media wraps them in stories that feel personal. And slowly, without ever realizing it, your mind becomes a mosaic of borrowed convictions. A patchwork of narratives you didn't write, but still defend. Now, here's where it gets more dangerous. Because belief isn't just about truth, it's about identity. To question what you believe isn't just to challenge an idea, it's to risk tearing apart who you think you are. And so you hesitate, you hold tighter. You tell yourself that doubt is dangerous. That certainty is strength. But certainty is a drug. It numbs the friction of the unknown. It gives you something to grip when the world feels too chaotic. And just like any drug, it has side effects. It makes you dismiss voices that disagree. It shrinks your curiosity. It blinds you to nuance, to contradiction, to complexity. Ever notice how two people can look at the same event, the same facts, and walk away with opposite conclusions? That's because facts don't speak for themselves. Beliefs interpret them. Like a prism bends light, your beliefs bend reality. They color every experience, every memory, every judgment you make. And the scariest part, the more emotionally invested you are in a belief, the less likely you are to examine it. Your brain actually protects beliefs that reinforce your identity. It rewards you for consistency, even when that consistency is built on illusion. It's not just ideology, it's protection. Because if a belief goes, what else collapses with it? Your community, your purpose, your sense of belonging. So instead of risk, you compartmentalize. You let contradictions exist in silence. You avoid conversations that make you uncomfortable. You keep scrolling, keep nodding, keep believing, because it's easier than admitting you might be wrong. But here's the truth. There are no pure beliefs, no perfect lenses, only shades, variations, contexts. And if you never examine the shade you live in, you risk mistaking the dim for the full light. Belief, at its worst, becomes a cage made of your own convictions. You don't need bars when you've convinced yourself. The walls don't exist. That's how systems stay intact. That's how manipulation survives. Not through force, but through belief. Every cult, every regime, every abusive relationship, none of them start with violence. They start with a story, a belief, a simple idea that seems harmless until it isn't. And this isn't just about other people. This is about you. The way you explain away injustice because it aligns with your worldview. The way you justify comfort over confrontation. The way you dismiss people who challenge your opinions, not because they're wrong, but because they make you feel vulnerable. But here's what belief can also be: a mirror, a test, a chance to grow, not just confirm. You can believe passionately and still remain open. You can question without collapsing. The goal isn't to believe nothing, it's to know why you believe what you do. So ask yourself, what beliefs do you hold that have never truly been tested? What ideas do you cling to because they feel safe, not because they feel true? And what might change? Who might you become if you let in the possibility that the world is bigger than what you've been taught to see? Because once you realize your beliefs aren't sacred, they're strategic. You stop defending them and you start understanding them. And that's where transformation begins. But what if the path you're walking isn't yours at all? You didn't choose your path, not really. You were handed it, paved and polished long before your first step. It was the school route, the job pipeline, the expectation machine. You didn't ask where it led, you just walked, because that's what you were told to do. Follow the line, stay between the rails, obey the signs, and if you ever dared to look left or right, the noise grew louder, warnings, shame, fear. It's safer this way, they said. Easier, more certain. But what they didn't tell you is that the beaten path isn't safer. It's just more predictable. It's not a road for discovery. It's a conveyor belt for compliance. It lulls you into a rhythm so familiar, you forget you're even walking. Step after step, task after task, milestone after milestone. You tell yourself this is freedom, this is progress, but deep down, something nags at you. A tension you can't name, because what you're really doing is participating in a script written by people who profit from your obedience. The beaten path is padded with false rewards. A diploma, a salary, a title, symbols of success, designed not to satisfy you, but to quiet you. They tell you you're doing well, so you won't ask why you feel so hollow. The further you walk, the more your choices shrink, not because you failed, but because the path was never yours to begin with. You're praised for walking it, applauded for not stepping out of line. But have you ever stopped to ask why so much energy is spent keeping you there? Why deviation is punished, not explored? Because the system doesn't want thinkers. It wants walkers. Predictable, silent, exhausted. And exhaustion is part of the trap. You're kept just busy enough to never question the path itself. There's no time to reflect, no room to breathe. Just enough comfort to sedate you. Just enough fear to keep you going. Promotions come, not because they free you, but because they tie you tighter. A golden leash is still a leash. You weren't taught to ask, why this path? You were taught to fear what happens if you leave it. You were trained to associate risk with ruin, deviation with failure. But the real failure, it's spending your entire life walking toward a destination that isn't yours. Achieving someone else's definition of success. Climbing someone else's ladder, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong wall. And here's the secret they don't want you to know. The path is beaten because it's been walked by the fearful, not the free. It's worn smooth by compromise, by resignation, by generations of people who accepted comfort over courage. You're not following in the footsteps of the bold. You're following the footprints of those who gave up their map. And yet stepping off feels impossible, doesn't it? The moment you consider it, the doubts flood in. What if I fail? What if I lose everything? But here's the deeper fear. What if you succeed? What if you step off the path and find a life that's truly yours? What if freedom isn't chaos, but clarity? But there's a price, always. Because stepping off means losing the praise, the applause, the illusion of certainty. It means walking without signs, without rails, guided only by your own instincts. And that is terrifying. That is real. That is yours. So ask yourself, who benefits from you staying on the beaten path? And who do you become when you finally step off it? Because once you do, something irreversible happens. You see the path for what it always was, not a road, but a cage, not safety, but sedation. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. So maybe it's time to stop walking where everyone else is. Maybe it's time to listen for the voice that's even quieter than the crowd, the whisper inside you that's been trying to speak all along. And speaking of whispers, there's something darker waiting in the silence, something that doesn't just follow you, but slowly becomes you. You're alone in a room, but not entirely. There's a voice, faint, curling around the edge of your consciousness. It doesn't shout, it doesn't demand, it whispers. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because it doesn't try to convince you, it just wants to be heard. It starts with a suggestion. Something so subtle it doesn't even feel foreign. Maybe a doubt about someone's intentions. A quiet urge to double-check something you never questioned before. It doesn't arrive with a neon sign or a siren. It arrives with the gentleness of a thought you assume is your own. That's the trick. Because the most powerful manipulation doesn't look like control. It looks like autonomy, like insight, like intuition. But it's none of those things. The whisper plants itself beneath your awareness. It feeds on repetition, not all at once, but over time. It doesn't need proof. It needs only proximity. You hear the same thing again and again, from different voices, angles, tones. Soon what was once alien becomes familiar, and what's familiar becomes truth. This is how beliefs form without evidence, how prejudice grows without malice, how fear spreads without reason. Think of how rumors work, how easily a simple story, told quietly and without authority, can infect a mind. It bypasses logic. It feels truer than facts because it taps into something older than reason, your survival instinct. That primitive need to know what others are saying, what others might do, where threats might come from. The whisper lives there, in that ancient part of your brain that reacts before it reflects. And it's not always negative. That's what makes it so insidious. Sometimes the whisper flatters you. It tells you you're special, that you see what others don't, that you're awake while they sleep. It hands you superiority on a silver platter, just quiet enough to avoid scrutiny. You begin to trust it, rely on it, and that's when you stop noticing. It's there at all, because the most effective whisper doesn't need volume. It needs trust. And once it has your trust, it can say anything, even lies. Especially lies. Ever wonder why some ideas feel so right, even when they're wrong? It's because you didn't reason your way to them. You absorbed them. Slowly, unconsciously. They drifted into your mind like background noise you forgot to filter. The whisper doesn't argue with you. It doesn't debate. It doesn't present data. It waits until you're tired, distracted, emotionally raw, then it speaks. And because it's always been there, you don't question it. You mistake its voice for your own. This is how ideologies root themselves. Not in clarity, but in confusion. Not in conviction, but in fatigue. The whisper thrives in ambiguity, where facts blur and feelings reign. It paints the world in binaries, us and them, right and wrong, safe and dangerous, and you follow. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. The mind seeks coherence, simplicity, certainty, and the whisper offers all of that in a language only you seem to understand. But here's the worst part. Once the whisper has rewired your thoughts, you defend it. You'll fight for it, argue for it, believe it's always been part of you, even if you can't remember where it started and who whispered it first. So ask yourself, whose voice are you really hearing when you make your decisions? Whose ideas guide your judgment? Whose fears shape your reality? Because if you can't trace the whisper, it's already won. But there's one thing it fears, one force it can't quite silence. Awareness. The moment you stop and ask, where did that come from? The whisper weakens. The illusion falters. The spell begins to break. You can't kill it, but you can unmask it. And once you see it for what it is, a parasite of perception, you begin to reclaim the one thing it stole from you, your mind, and the moment you do, you'll start to hear something else. A silence you forgot existed. But don't get too comfortable in that quiet. Because sometimes the whisper isn't in your head. Sometimes it's a rule, and sometimes that rule is invisible. and it's running you. You don't remember learning it. You didn't choose it, but somehow it governs nearly every decision you make. It's not a law, not a rule in any book. It's a hidden instruction, subtle, silent, and invisible, yet it holds power over your life like a script you never agreed to follow. It's the rule that tells you not to speak up in meetings. The one that says don't make eye contact with strangers on the train. The rule that tells you it's impolite to ask uncomfortable questions, or that pursuing your real passion is selfish if it doesn't pay the bills. These rules aren't enforced by police or governments. They're enforced by glances, by silence, by the unspoken judgment of everyone around you. These are hidden rules, and they run you, quietly, constantly. They're absorbed so early and so deeply, you no longer notice them. You think your decisions are yours. You think your hesitations are logical. But more often than not, they're rehearsals of invisible scripts. Scripts written by culture, by upbringing, by the silent architecture of the system. Have you ever tried to break one of these rules? Try leaving a high-status job for a lower-paying one that actually fulfills you. Try skipping a family holiday because it doesn't feel safe for your mental health. Try refusing small talk in a world that thrives on politeness. Watch what happens. People don't get angry, they get confused. As if you've broken a spell. Their discomfort isn't about you, it's about the rule you just exposed. The most powerful rules are the ones you don't realize you're following. That's what gives them their grip. You don't challenge what you can't see. You don't question what you believe is just how things are. And that's how these hidden rules spread, from person to person, generation to generation. Not through enforcement, but through mimicry. You copy what you saw growing up. You absorb your parents' fears, your teachers' boundaries, your peers' silences. You become fluent in a language of restriction, without ever realizing you learned it. Sometimes the rule is don't stand out. Other times don't speak, unless you're sure. Or don't trust your own instincts. Wait for approval. These rules keep you small, polite, predictable. They strip away the rawness of being fully human and replace it with a safe, acceptable version of you. The danger is that these rules feel moral. They feel right, because everyone around you follows them too. But morality is not the same as conformity. And most of these hidden rules don't serve truth, or justice, or well-being. They serve control, and not even conscious control, just the quiet inertia of a system designed to sustain itself. You're told you're free, but freedom without awareness is hollow. You can't choose what you don't know is influencing you. And every time you defer, delay, or self-silence, without knowing why, you're being run, not by your desires or your ethics, but by a script you never chose. So how do you spot a hidden rule? Look for hesitation. Look for guilt that seems outsized. Look for the moments when you know what you want to do. But don't track that resistance. Ask, whose voice is this? Who taught me this? Who benefits if I obey? The answers are rarely comforting, but they're illuminating. Breaking a hidden rule is terrifying. The fear doesn't come from logic. It comes from the threat of exclusion, rejection, shame. But that's the telltale sign. You're on the edge of something important, something real. The system wants obedience, not aliveness. And hidden rules exist to preserve that obedience. But what if you disobeyed? Not recklessly, but consciously. What if you walked into the discomfort, named the script, and rewrote it? Not just for you, but for everyone else watching, silently longing to do the same. Because the moment one person breaks a hidden rule out loud, others realize they can too. That it was never a rule to begin with, just a fear pretending to be wisdom. And maybe that's the key, the way out. Not through rebellion alone, but through awareness. through the radical act of seeing the rule before it sees you. Because once you name the invisible, it loses its power. And once you truly choose, your actions, you stop being run. Now ask yourself, how many rules are still running you? And what happens when the next one breaks? What if the next one is just a click away? You're scrolling, barely aware. Another headline, another thumbnail, another must-see link. Before you even know what you've done, you've clicked, not because you truly wanted to, not because you needed to, but because some unseen mechanism grabbed the part of your mind that wasn't watching, that wasn't thinking, and that part clicked. But what if that small, almost invisible moment isn't as harmless as it feels? What if every click is a thread in a vast psychological net being drawn around you? You are not browsing freely, you are being shepherded. Clickbait isn't about information. It's about manipulation. The image is exaggerated. The title is loaded with emotion, outrage, curiosity, fear, lust. It bypasses logic and aims straight at your instincts. You don't decide to click, your nervous system does. Your brain is wired to crave novelty, to seek answers to unfinished questions. You won't believe what happens next. She said what? 10 things you didn't know about. These aren't statements, they're triggers, traps. And you walk into them, not because you're weak or foolish, but because your brain is working exactly as evolution designed it to. Dopamine surges the moment you anticipate something interesting, not when you find it, not when you learn it, just in the expectation. Clicking the link satisfies that urge for a moment. But the reward is fleeting. The information is empty. The satisfaction dissolves before it even forms. And so you click again and again. This is not an accident. This is an industry. Designers, psychologists, marketers, they know what makes you pause, what makes you hover, what makes you commit. Every element of a web page, every scroll, every autoplay feature is carefully crafted to keep you locked in a loop. You are not the customer, you are the product. Your attention is being sold, second by second, to the highest bidder, and a cost. Your autonomy. Because the more you click without thinking, the more you train your mind not to think, you become more reactive, more impulsive, less capable of sustained thought or deep concentration. Your attention span shortens, your patience dissolves, your tolerance for complexity erodes. Eventually, long-form thought feels uncomfortable, stillness feels wrong, silence becomes unbearable. Now you're no longer just clicking links. You're being conditioned. Worse still, the system learns. Algorithms track what you click. When you click, how long you linger, how fast you scroll. It builds a psychological profile more accurate than any therapist ever could. And then it feeds you content tailored to keep you locked inside the cage of your own reflexes. You're not exploring the internet. You're walking a hall of mirrors, designed to reflect the version of yourself most likely to stay engaged. And every click sharpens the reflection. The links you click without thought are teaching machines how to think for you. And every time you choose distraction over intention, you surrender a little more of your mental sovereignty, until eventually you forget what it even feels like to choose freely. Ask yourself this: when was the last time you navigated the internet with a goal, with purpose? Not chasing entertainment, not hunting novelty, but seeking something meaningful. Do you remember? The truth is, most people don't. And this loss isn't trivial, because what you click becomes what you consume. What you consume becomes what you believe. And what you believe shapes the world you live in. So these unconscious clicks, they're not small. They're foundational. Every careless interaction is a vote, a signal, a piece of data that reinforces the kind of world the internet becomes. You think you're wasting time, but you're helping build a reality, one where distraction is profitable, confusion is engineered, and your mind is just another battlefield in a war you didn't even know was being fought. So the next time your finger hovers over that next irresistible link, stop. Not forever, just for a breath. Just long enough to ask yourself, why am I clicking this? Who benefits from this action? What is this moment shaping in me? Because maybe, just maybe, that moment of awareness is the first step toward reclaiming your mind from a system that's trained you to give it away. And if even one thoughtless click can lead you into a trap, imagine what fills the space when your mind is empty and you don't even realize it. What do you feel when everything goes quiet? Not the kind of quiet you get in nature or the comforting silence between friends, but the hollow, humming kind. The silence that feels like it's pressing in from the inside. You know that the room is still, but your head isn't. Your thoughts scatter, racing toward nothing in particular, as if trying to outrun the void you didn't know was waiting. That's not peace, that's empty space, and it's filling your mind more than you'd ever admit. It starts small, a few seconds between notifications, a pause after a conversation ends. That unfamiliar stillness crawls in and sits with you. You try to fill it without even realizing, checking your phone, turning on a screen, looking for something, anything to drown it out. Because in that silence, something terrifying happens. You start to hear yourself, and what you hear isn't always pleasant. Regret, doubt, loneliness, questions you've buried beneath constant distraction. That's the paradox. You crave quiet, but can't bear the version of yourself that surfaces in it. So you run, you reach for noise, for routine, for anything that keeps the void at bay. But here's the disturbing part. It's not the silence that's dangerous. It's what that silence reveals. You begin to realize how little of your inner life is actually yours. Most of your thoughts aren't original. They're echoes. Pieces of ads you've seen, opinions you've absorbed, fears you've inherited. You didn't create the noise, but you've come to depend on it. This is the trap. When your mind becomes a container for everything external, content, headlines, schedules, social roles, it starts rejecting its own content, your ideas, your imagination, your emotional truth. There's no room left for them. The external world fills your internal space until you forget there was ever a difference. You confuse input with identity. Noise becomes self. And so empty space becomes terrifying, not because it's empty, but because it forces you to notice just how hollow the noise really is. Most people don't reach for distraction out of laziness. They do it because the alternative feels unbearable. Being alone with your thoughts means seeing them as they are, raw, disorganized, sometimes cruel. And if you've spent years molding your life around what other people want, think, or expect, then those unfiltered moments feel like exposure, like standing naked in a room full of mirrors. That discomfort, that's not weakness. It's your mind trying to tell you something important. That beneath the flood of obligations, expectations, and external validations, there's a version of you that hasn't been heard in years. And it's screaming into the silence, hoping you'll finally listen. But to listen, you have to let the space stay empty. Not just for a second. Long enough for the echoes to die down. Long enough to realize how much you've been confusing noise with necessity. That endless scrolling isn't curiosity, it's sedation. That productivity isn't always purpose. It's often panic in disguise. You have to sit in the vacuum and hear what rises from within it. Not because it's easy, but because it's the only way to know you're still in there. still alive, still real. And when you do, something strange happens. That empty space starts to feel less like a void and more like a mirror. You start to recognize the outlines of a mind that was buried under obligation. A voice that doesn't come from algorithms or approval. A you that isn't manufactured, marketed, or monetized. But this won't come if you keep filling the silence before it speaks. So the next time you feel the hum of nothing creep in, don't run from it. Don't rush to stuff it with entertainment or errands. Stay, just for a moment. Stay and feel what it's like to have your mind empty, not because it's broken, but because it's finally yours again. And once you've heard that inner voice speak through the silence, you'll start to notice something else. You'll start to notice how even the smallest external reminder can pull you right back into the current. What if a single notification, one you didn't even see, could rewrite your entire mood, your focus, your day? You check your phone, just one notification. A calendar alert, a little reminder. Maybe it's a meeting in 20 minutes, or a task you postponed yesterday, or a vague follow-up with James. You tap dismiss. You barely notice. But that tiny buzz, that little beep, it just made a decision for you. Because it's never just a reminder. It's a micro command, a digital whisper, redirecting your attention, your energy, your priorities, and you follow it instantly. Without thinking, not because you agree, but because it asked first. You didn't pause to consider what mattered most to you in that moment. You just reacted, like you always do. That's how reminders work. Not as suggestions, but as scripts. They hijack your executive function, sneak past your mental defenses, and insert themselves into your behavior with surgical precision. They exploit your tendency to comply, to respond, to just get it done. And the moment you do, they win. Because they've bypassed your will with something more powerful. Automation. Now think about how many reminders you get. Every day, emails, alerts, notifications, pings, nudges. How many of those are truly yours? How many originate from your authentic priorities, your deepest values, your inner sense of purpose? Almost none. Most reminders come from systems that don't care about you. Apps that want your engagement, workflows that want your labor, people that want your time, algorithms that want your attention. And the more you respond, the more you reward those systems with your obedience. You're being trained. Each reminder is a pulse in a larger rhythm, one designed to condition your behavior. You don't need chains when you have a schedule. You don't need guards when you have notifications. You don't need a cage when you've internalized the alarm. That's the trick. Eventually, the reminders stop being external. They become you. You start pre-reminding yourself. You wake up already anxious about what you need to do. You remember things you haven't even been told yet. You preemptively react, not because something demanded it, but because your brain has been rewired to anticipate the demand. And it doesn't stop with productivity. Reminders shape your self-worth. That app that reminds you to walk, you feel guilty when you don't. The calendar reminder for your ex's birthday, you wonder if you're a bad person for ignoring it. The daily mindfulness prompt, you shame yourself for skipping it. You start equating compliance with value. The more you follow the prompts, the more on track you feel. And when you don't, you feel like you're falling apart, slipping, failing, not because you actually are, but because the reminders trained you to believe that structure equals stability and deviation equals collapse. But who benefits from that? Certainly not you. You're not more free. You're more organized. Yes, but organized according to someone else's design. You're not making decisions. You're following a pre-laid path. Your day is not yours. It's pre-scheduled, pre-filtered, predetermined. Even your free time isn't really free. Take a break becomes another checkbox. Have fun is just another item to cross off. Leisure becomes labor disguised as rest. And all of this started with a reminder, a harmless alert, a simple nudge. But behind it was an architecture of influence, a system designed to make you think you're choosing, when really you're reacting. So what happens when you ignore it? When you let a reminder buzz and fade, without response, you feel it, don't you? The discomfort, the tension, like you're breaking a rule, like you're defying something sacred. That's not accidental, that's learned. That's how deeply reminders infiltrate your psyche. They make you believe that following is virtue, that remembering is morality, that discipline is the same thing as purpose. But there's a difference between remembering and obeying, a difference between order and control, a difference between being reminded and being ruled. So the next time a reminder pops up, pause, ask yourself, who sent this? Who benefits if I follow it? Does this align with who I want to be? Or is this just another thread tightening around me, disguised as guidance? Because one small reminder can steer your entire day, and 1,000 of them. They can steer your entire life. And the scariest part, you might never even notice. Now ask yourself, why is it so hard to step off the path, even when you know it leads nowhere? Because next, we need to talk about why you stay on safe ground. You've built a life around the illusion of safety. Familiar faces, predictable routines, streets you know by heart. There's a strange comfort in boundaries, in knowing your place. But what if I told you that your loyalty to safe ground isn't caution, it's captivity? You might think you're being prudent, careful, that you're avoiding unnecessary risk. But deep down, it's not logic that's keeping you here. It's fear. Fear dressed in sensible clothing. Fear disguised as responsibility, as maturity, as common sense. From the day you're born, you're taught to crave safety. Don't talk to strangers. Don't climb too high. Don't try unless you're sure you won't fail. Each warning etches itself into your nervous system until hesitation becomes second nature. You don't even call it fear anymore. You call it wisdom. But here's the trap. The longer you stay on safe ground, the more terrifying the edge becomes. Your tolerance for risk withers. Your appetite for challenge starves. You grow so used to the comfort of stability that anything unknown feels like death. And so you shrink. You don't grow older. You grow smaller, quieter, tamer. Look closer. Every safe decision you've made, every job you took because it was secure, every opportunity you passed up because it was too uncertain, wasn't about logic. It was about avoiding discomfort. You didn't stay put because you loved where you were. You stayed because movement meant danger. And you're still convincing yourself that paralysis is peace. But safety, the kind you're clinging to, is a myth. The ground you think is solid isn't. It's shifting beneath you constantly. Economies crash, relationships fracture, illness strikes. Life doesn't care how careful you've been. Playing it safe doesn't shield you from chaos. It just ensures you never learn how to dance with it. There's another danger, quieter and more sinister. The slow erosion of who you could have been. Every time you choose safety over risk, you trade possibility for predictability. You sacrifice growth for comfort. And those sacrifices accumulate until you can't recognize your own potential anymore. It dies, not with a bang, but with endless tiny surrenders. You may think you're protecting yourself, But safe ground doesn't just keep danger out, it keeps you in. It builds walls that double as cages. And the longer you live within them, the more they begin to feel like home. You decorate them, you defend them, you call them freedom. But deep down you know better. You know because every now and then a flicker of restlessness cuts through the numbness. A whisper that says, there's more than this. And for a brief moment, you wonder what would happen if you stepped beyond the boundary, if you embraced the chaos instead of hiding from it. But then the fear returns. The stories you've been told about what happens to people who stray too far from the path. They fall, they fail, they're forgotten. And so you retreat again, not because you lack courage, but because you've never been taught that fear is part of the journey. That discomfort is the doorway to transformation. The truth is, the life you want lives beyond safety. It exists where the ground is unstable, where there are no guarantees, where you might fall, but where you also might fly. You'll never meet your full self if you only walk paths you've already memorized. And here's the most disturbing part. The system is designed to keep you on safe ground. Not because it cares about you, but because you're easier to control when you're afraid. Comfortable people don't revolt. Predictable people don't resist. People who cling to safety rarely ask dangerous questions. But you weren't born to be tame. You weren't made for comfort alone. There is something wild inside you, something vast and untamed, that knows how to adapt, how to risk, how to rise after failure. It's waiting. It always has been. So the next time you feel the pull of safety, ask yourself, is this caution or captivity? Are you protecting your life or postponing it? Because at some point, staying safe becomes the most dangerous thing you can do. You'll never find yourself on safe ground, only echoes of who you were told to be. But what happens once the sun sets and you're alone with the standard you chase each night? You lie awake, not because you're in pain, not because something's wrong, but because something's missing, something invisible, quiet, but deeply persistent. It's not fear. It's not even stress. It's the hollow echo of a standard you can never quite meet, the one you set for yourself. Or more accurately, the one that was set for you long ago, quietly, without consent. You don't remember the moment it started. Maybe it was a look of disapproval from a parent, a teacher's praise tied to performance, a commercial promising happiness if you just bought one more thing. At some point, excellence stopped being a celebration and became a requirement. The standard stopped being a goal and became a condition. You weren't just reaching for it, you were measured by it, judged, reduced. So each night you lie in bed, replaying the day like a surveillance tape. Every word you said, every moment you hesitated, every smile that felt forced. You audit your existence with ruthless precision. You wonder, did I do enough? Was I impressive enough? Did I make progress? And if not, the punishment isn't immediate. It's worse. It's subtle. It's the quiet withdrawal of self-worth. Because this standard isn't about growth. It's about worthiness. It's about earning your right to feel okay, to rest, to exist without shame. And the most twisted part, you can never reach it. The bar always moves. Success doesn't bring relief. It raises the stakes. Achievement doesn't silence the critic. It sharpens its blade. The standard you chase is a ghost. It has no face, no name, no clear origin, but it has power because it lives inside you. It speaks in your voice. It mimics your conscience, but it's not you. It's the echo of a system that profits from your discontent, a society that teaches you to confuse perfection with safety, to equate flawlessness with love, to believe that who you are is never quite enough. and so you hustle, endlessly. Not just for money or status, but for permission to feel good about yourself. To take a day off without guilt, to speak without rehearsing, to be loved without performance. But the standard always whispers, not yet, not enough, try harder. It invades every part of your life. In your work, it demands output. In your relationships, it demands polish. In your appearance, it demands symmetry, thinness, youth. And every time you fall short, and you will, it punishes you with silence, shame, and the haunting feeling that everyone else has figured out something you haven't. The truth is, this standard was never yours. It was handed to you by parents who projected their own fears, by institutions that needed obedient students, not fulfilled individuals, by media that sells inadequacy as a lifestyle. You were conditioned to believe that your worth is conditional, fragile, and always on trial. But here's the secret they never told you. The standard is a scam. It's designed to be unreachable. That's how it keeps you running, because a person who's constantly chasing is too tired to question, too preoccupied to rebel, too consumed to see that their leash is self-imposed. And yet, you can't just abandon it, because that standard, as toxic as it is, became part of your identity. Letting it go feels like losing a part of yourself. Who are you, if not striving? What do you do if you stop proving? The silence that follows is terrifying, but it's also the beginning of something truer. Maybe rest isn't laziness. Maybe imperfection isn't failure. Maybe your worth was never meant to be earned. And maybe the standard you chase each night is not a measure of your value, but a monument to your conditioning. Let that sink in, because until you do, you'll keep running. And the night will keep you, not with noise, but with silence. The kind of silence that asks one devastating question: who would you be if you stopped chasing? And just when you think that silence might offer peace, something else happens. Someone says something small, but you can feel it shift in your brain, because now you're about to discover what happens when a hint becomes a demand. You're in a conversation. Everything's fine on the surface, no raised voices, no obvious threats. But something changes. A sentence lands too heavily. A smile lasts just a second too long. A request floats between you, wrapped in politeness, but it doesn't feel like a request. It feels like an order in disguise. This is the moment a hint becomes a demand. It begins subtly, a raised eyebrow, a casual suggestion. Maybe they say, "Wouldn't it be nice if someone handled that?" Or, "I bet you're the kind of person who always comes through." It's not a direct command, but it doesn't need to be. The pressure doesn't come from their words. It comes from the silence that follows, the expectation hanging in the air like a weight. You feel it in your body. Your chest tightens, your mind races. You start justifying. They didn't say, "I had to do it," but if I don't, what happens then? You imagine the disappointment, the withdrawal of affection, the unspoken punishment. Suddenly, it feels easier to just do it. Not because you want to, but because not doing it feels dangerous. And that's how control works, when it's dressed in subtlety. People rarely control others through brute force. Not anymore. The modern world prefers elegance, manipulation wrapped in suggestion, social pressure disguised as courtesy, compliance won not by command, but by implication. This tactic thrives in personal relationships. Someone close to you, partner, parent, friend, rarely tells you what to do outright. Instead, they build a network of obligations. "You're the only one I trust with this. No one else understands me like you do. I just thought you'd want to help. It flatters and binds you at the same time. Refusing feels like betrayal, not assertion. But it gets worse. The danger isn't just that others do this to you. It's that you internalize it. You start anticipating the hint before it's even spoken. You notice their mood shift, their tone darken. You act preemptively, not to please them, but to avoid tension. You police your own actions. Their subtle signals become your marching orders. You become your own captor. This is not kindness. It's coercion. And yet, it doesn't feel violent. That's the trick, because there's no shouting, no threats, no visible abuse. Your mind struggles to label it. You tell yourself you're being helpful, compassionate. But what you're really doing is folding yourself to fit someone else's comfort. Again and again. This form of control is especially potent because it hijacks your identity. You're not just being pushed, you're being trained. Over time, you stop distinguishing between your wants and theirs. Their preferences become your habits. Their needs become your priorities. You forget what it feels like to do something freely. And the scariest part, you might start doing it to others. Once you've absorbed this dynamic, you replicate it. Not consciously, not maliciously, but you learn that hints are safer than honesty. That indirectness is more acceptable than confrontation. That saying, "I need you to do this," sounds too aggressive, too selfish. So you whisper it instead, cloak it in suggestion, and wait for them to obey. Because this isn't just about power, it's about identity. You're taught to believe that being good means being agreeable. That saying no makes you difficult. That setting boundaries makes you cold. And so you learn to hint, to imply, to manipulate, softly, quietly, just like you were taught. You become part of the cycle. Escaping it takes more than awareness. It takes the courage to let people be uncomfortable with your truth. To say what you mean, without apology. To tolerate the silence that follows a rejected demand. It means risking being seen as selfish rather than living as someone else's puppet. You have to rewire your brain to believe that a direct no is not cruelty and that a vague yes is not kindness. Because if you don't, the cycle continues. The hint becomes a demand. The demand becomes expectation. And soon your life stops being yours at all. Next time someone says, "I just thought you'd want to help," ask yourself, are they inviting you to choose, or are they trapping you into compliance? And if you don't know the answer, watch what happens when you say no. The next segment peels back another layer. What if the behavior you're trapped in today is just a shadow of something you've been doing your entire life? You wake up. The room feels the same, the light filters in just like yesterday, and the world continues spinning quietly around you. But beneath it all, beneath your routines, your thoughts, your choices, there's a pattern, a familiar, invisible rhythm pulsing under the surface. Most people never see it. Most people never even look. But it's there, and it controls far more than you realize. It starts small. You wake up, check your phone, scroll through messages, half read headlines, half believe what you see. You brush your teeth, drink your coffee, rush out the door. It feels like autonomy, like free will. But what if it isn't? What if it's programming, disguised as preference? What if your morning routine isn't yours at all, but just the echo of yesterday's choices, repeated again under the illusion of freedom? That's the insidious thing about patterns. They disguise themselves as comfort. You do what you did yesterday because it worked, because it's easy, because it doesn't require thought. And slowly, without noticing, your life becomes a loop. Not a conscious sequence of decisions, but a subconscious surrender to familiarity. And these patterns, they don't stop at behavior. They seep into how you think, how you perceive yourself, how you treat others. The words you use, the tone you default to, the judgments you make, all shaped by repetition, all shaped by the pattern. But the pattern isn't neutral. It's not just a passive sequence. It's a strategy, refined, reinforced, and rewarded by the systems that benefit most from your predictability. Corporations want you locked in buying cycles. Governments want you subdued by routine. Social norms want you predictable enough to control, docile enough not to question. So the pattern becomes a trap, one that feels safe while it quietly strangles your agency. Think of how you speak to yourself. The same inner voice, the same criticisms, the same insecurities looping over and over again. That voice didn't appear by accident. It was shaped, conditioned. Every repeated thought carved a deeper groove in your mind until the pattern became your personality. And now you confuse the voice for who you are. Even your emotions follow patterns. You feel stuck in sadness, frustration, or numbness, not because of one moment, but because of hundreds of reinforced responses trained into you over time. You react the same way, not because it's right, but because it's familiar. You're not feeling freely, you're following the script. But here's the most disturbing part. The longer the pattern continues, the more it feels like identity. You stop seeing it as something you do and start believing it's who you are. You're not someone stuck in a loop. You are the loop. And once that happens, change becomes almost impossible because it no longer feels like breaking a habit. It feels like breaking yourself. So you settle. You justify. You say, this is just how I am. This is how life works. This is good enough. But deep down you know better. You feel the friction. You hear the voice that whispers, there's more than this. You just don't know how to break it. Because the pattern you repeat today is the same one that will quietly define your tomorrow, unless you intervene. But intervention means war. A war against inertia, against comfort, against every small lie you tell yourself to stay inside the loop. It means disrupting what's easy, questioning what's automatic, doubting what you've always believed about yourself. And that's terrifying, because what if you're wrong? What if this is all you can be? What if there's no you outside the pattern? But maybe the better question is, what if there is? Because patterns are powerful, but they're not permanent. They can be broken, rewritten, replaced. But not by accident, only by awareness, only by choice. You have to catch the pattern in the act. See it unfolding. Interrupt it with something new, something intentional. Because every time you break the loop, even once, you fracture its hold on you. You plant doubt where there was certainty. You make space for change. So ask yourself, what is the pattern you're repeating right now? What behavior, thought, belief are you carrying from yesterday into today? And who gave it to you? Did you choose it, or did it choose you? Because until you answer that, you're not living, you're just reliving. And if that truth unsettles you, good. That's where change begins. Because the pattern you repeat today might be the prison you live in tomorrow. And now ask yourself, if it's all just a pattern, then why do you still feel so stuck? And why can't you see the trap even when you're already inside it? You wake up. The room feels the same. The light filters in, just like yesterday, and the world continues spinning quietly around you. But beneath it all, beneath your routines, your thoughts, your choices, there's a pattern, a familiar, invisible rhythm pulsing under the surface. Most people never see it. Most people never even look, but it's there, and it controls far more than you realize. It starts small. You wake up, Check your phone, scroll through messages, half read headlines, half believe what you see. You brush your teeth, drink your coffee, rush out the door. It feels like autonomy, like free will. But what if it isn't? What if it's programming disguised as preference? What if your morning routine isn't yours at all, but just the echo of yesterday's choices, repeated again under the illusion of freedom? That's the insidious thing about patterns. They disguise themselves as comfort. You do what you did yesterday because it worked, because it's easy, because it doesn't require thought. And slowly, without noticing, your life becomes a loop. Not a conscious sequence of decisions, but a subconscious surrender to familiarity. And these patterns, they don't stop at behavior, they seep into how you think, how you perceive yourself, how you treat others. The words you use, the tone you default to, the judgments you make, all shaped by repetition, all shaped by the pattern. But the pattern isn't neutral. It's not just a passive sequence, it's a strategy, refined, reinforced, and rewarded by the systems that benefit most from your predictability. Corporations want you locked in buying cycles. Governments want you subdued by routine. Social norms want you predictable enough to control, docile enough not to question. So the pattern becomes a trap. One that feels safe while it quietly strangles your agency. Think of how you speak to yourself. The same inner voice, the same criticisms, the same insecurities looping over and over again. That voice didn't appear by accident. It was shaped, conditioned. Every repeated thought carved a deeper groove in your mind until the pattern became your personality. And now you confuse the voice for who you are. Even your emotions follow patterns. You feel stuck in sadness, frustration, or numbness, not because of one moment, but because of hundreds of reinforced responses trained into you over time. You react the same way, not because it's right, but because it's familiar. You're not feeling freely, you're following the script. But here's the most disturbing part. The longer the pattern continues, the more it feels like identity. You stop seeing it as something you do and start believing it's who you are. You're not someone stuck in a loop. You are the loop. And once that happens, change becomes almost impossible because it no longer feels like breaking a habit. It feels like breaking yourself. So you settle. You justify. You say, this is just how I am. This is how life works. This is good enough. But deep down you know better. You feel the friction. You hear the voice that whispers, there's more than this. You just don't know how to break it. Because the pattern you repeat today is the same one that will quietly define your tomorrow. Unless you intervene. But intervention means war. A war against inertia, against comfort. Against every small lie you tell yourself to stay inside the loop. It means disrupting what's easy, questioning what's automatic, doubting what you've always believed about yourself. And that's terrifying. Because what if you're wrong? What if this is all you can be? What if there's no you outside the pattern? But maybe the better question is, what if there is? Because patterns are powerful, but they're not permanent. They can be broken, rewritten, replaced, but not by accident, only by awareness, only by choice. You have to catch the pattern in the act, see it unfolding, interrupt it with something new, something intentional, because every time you break the loop, even once, you fracture its hold on you. You plant doubt where there was certainty. You make space for change. So ask yourself, what is the pattern you're repeating right now? What behavior, thought, belief are you carrying from yesterday into today? And who gave it to you? Did you choose it, or did it choose you? Because until you answer that, you're not living. You're just reliving. And if that truth unsettles you, good. That's where change begins. Because the pattern you repeat today might be the prison you live in tomorrow. And now ask yourself, if it's all just a pattern, then why do you still feel so stuck? And why can't you see the trap, even when you're already inside it?